Blue Eyes looked at the man with a welcoming expression, and quiet, childish laughter echoed throughout the room. He held in his arms a baby who looked like an angel, and it seemed his hands were shaking with excitement. Enoch Rubinstein was 20 years old and had his little newborn daughter in his arms. He wondered if she would recognize him as her father, his eyes scanning the baby's face. His blood and his flesh, it was the so-called love. He could not understand the nature of his feelings. Their child, like other children of the aristocratic families of the empire, was conceived as a raft to continue the family line. He thought he would not feel anything, but the child in his arms, through whose veins his blood flowed. She was supposed to be a great person when she grew up, a future aristocrat. But her fate was not so rosy. She had to become a dog of the empire. But, hoping not to experience feelings for her, although he was waiting for her birth, he could not leave her here. He wasn't going to leave her here and condemn her to the same life he had. The soft skin and warm breath of his own daughter calmed him and gave him strength. It was decided to leave the palace, taking his daughter. It remained to figure out where to go. He would not allow her to live the same terrible life on the battlefields that he had lived. However, in the process, he was caught at the exit from the courtyard by a gentle, ingratiating voice. She stared at him, although she didn't laugh after all. This was her child. Selena was 20 years old. She was the child's biological mother, but unlike the man, she had no feelings for the girl. She found it difficult to understand the man's recklessness, and he did not want her to grow up in the same environment as him. Although she didn't care about the fate of the man in whom her blood flows, among other things, he didn't even ask her when making this decision. Perhaps he misunderstood her when he suggested that they run away together, and she saw this as a benefit for herself in the future. He turned out to be much more impulsive than she had expected. They were born nobles of the empire. They had to live and die for the empire, and the same was true for this child, so carefully pressed to his father's chest. And yet she did not condemn him. She even understood. Since she was her daughter too, she also thought about it. But he was not going to give in. They parted coldly. The street buried this conversation under the sound of their heels. Finally, he said that he would go to Zenon. Whether he would be there or not, he did not know, but now she knew it. A grin lit up the girl's face. She nodded and left, leaving behind her husband and daughter, who had decided to leave. 7 years have passed since the disappearance of the Empire's only holy sword, Enoch Rubinstein. She still did not give in to his persuasion and did not want to get out of bed, but he continued to shake her. She, drooling on the pillow, began to rub her eyes and mumble something incoherently, pushing the man's hand away. But the man was adamant, lifting her up and saying it was time for breakfast, a pair of diamond-colored eyes staring at him. Sweet appearance, gentle hands, an apron with cherries. He was a bachelor and raised his daughter alone. The name of this housekeeper is James Brown. He made breakfast and was already carrying the baby into the kitchen to have breakfast. The little girl listened contentedly to her dad until she began to smell a suspicious smell. She felt that underneath the aroma of boiled eggs was the smell of broccoli, which she did not like. She immediately started scolding her dad for trying to feed her with them, even though he knew her attitude towards them, but he put his finger to his lips. He said that for eating broccoli, the baby would be able to get her favorite sweet that he had prepared. The younger one's indignation knew no bounds. This was real blackmail, bribery. How could he do that? He thought she would fall for it. He dared to think she was so gullible. He was right. She was. The little girl agreed with a disgruntledly cute face, and Dad began to rock her in his arms. James loved his baby very much. His daughter was everything to him. That's why he tried so hard. Lilith Brown, a 7-year-old girl who, as she grew up, gradually began to remember her past life. Her father was a simple man whom she loved very much. They lived peacefully and happily without worrying about anything. By the age of 3, the girl had already begun to see memories of her past life at the age of 7. She already remembered everything. She knew that she had entered the world from a novel she had read in her past life when she was a graduate student. She died at the age of 25 from exhaustion and stress while writing her dissertation. The girl couldn't understand how much stress she was under because of her dissertation that she ended up in a romance. She picked at her plate with her fork, and while she was thinking about the past, she was wondering why she had to hide the broccoli under the sausages. At the same time, the father was combing the girl's hair, thinking about what hairstyle to do today. She went on strike and demanded a regular adult ponytail, even though her father saw her as a little girl. At 7, the little girl was shorter than the 5-year-old boy next door, although she was much smarter. However, she understood that she shouldn't arouse her dad's suspicions, so she had to ask for bunny ears. Her cute face was framed by light gray hair, which was pulled back into ponytails on the sides. James warned his daughter that he was going to the market and she would need to babysit Aunt Susan. He did not take the girl with him. The military were walking nearby and could, upon seeing her, take her away immediately. Her father's words made her suspicious. Why should she worry if she didn't have magical abilities? Elite soldiers of the Imperial Army came here to look for capable knights who could use magic in battle. They were not competent in this area. Her father was an absolutely ordinary person, externally and internally. But the girl, after much torment, was happy to live a normal life with her father. She was wrong. Such a quiet and calm life was quite to the girl's liking after the past 22 years of torment. He promised himself to make his daughter happy, to raise her and give her the best possible. Leaving the girl with her aunt, the man went to the market, promising to bring his daughter something tasty. Another acorn fell into the pile with a thud, while the man's melodic voice told the story once again. He was the first to come to such a wilderness, very young, but already a dad, quiet and silent. His presence here was unnoticed, and therefore he was interesting, but one evening he himself came to their doorstep. He held little Lilith in his arms. She wasn't sick, but she didn't eat anything. She wanted to eat, but she wouldn't take the bottle. She kept crying. The woman picked up the baby to examine her, and a solution was found quickly. The woman invited him into the house and made some porridge for the baby to feed. It was baby food. She gave the spoon and plate to the man and told him to feed her. Now she had to eat. Having smelled something delicious, she tried it, and the food turned out to be really suitable for her age. The baby was already more than 5 months old, but her father still fed her milk. She cried from hunger. The woman recalled that day with a giggle. It was hard to raise a child, but James learned everything. And her husband said that from that day on, he began to often bring them firewood in gratitude for their help and began to greet them. This time the man won, he was sure of it, taking the nuts from the pile, a straight flush. But the girl stopped the man's hand. He rejoiced too early. She had something to show him. She had a royal flush. She won again, and the man was left to try to win back the money tomorrow, again. The girl thanked them, getting ready to leave. She had things to do. She wanted to do everything while her dad was away. She grabbed a basket of dirty laundry. She wanted to help her dad, so she was going to wash the clothes. Of course, Aunt Susan offered to help, but she refused because she had to do everything herself. Of course, she was very grateful to her aunt for her kindness and help. Her aunt saw a real angel in her. She even refused to help carry the basket to the river and ran with it herself, barely seeing where she was going. Dad didn't like it when she did something in secret from him, but she still helped him because she knew it was hard. She remembered her aunt's words. He tried so hard since she was born. She wanted to grow up and help him too. Lilith washed clothes in the river, enjoying the quiet and peaceful life that was given to her. Of course, ordinary people were not considered people, but it was easier for them. They did not have to go and die for the Empire. The girl saw reincarnation as pure luck. She preferred this kind of life. However, she was distracted from her work by the clatter of hooves and the noise of voices of people approaching her. Her large beady eyes looked at the people who, as they approached, created shadows. She did not see the face. The large horse, held in check by the reins in the hands of the rider, puffed and looked ahead. On his uniform was the imperial coat of arms. In front of him was the Imperial Army, the Blue Knights. Right now, the ones her dad feared were standing in front of her, looking her over. They were the second-ranked knight class, but it was unlikely that they could capture her. She had no ability. At least that's what she thought. Was she right? Definitely not. The knight saw her eyes. The daughter looked incredibly like her father, and he grabbed her like a kitten, lifting her off the ground. Some kind of magic stick immediately began to shine in his hand, with which he was testing something, apparently his abilities. The test showed that there was ability. He handed the girl over to the rider, saying that she was the one. The rider grabbed Lilith. All that was left was to wait for her father to return, albeit accompanied by children's screams. She was just a simple child, so why was she suddenly captured? Only she was happy about a quiet life. They thought that her father was the commander of some order of knights. He was the most powerful character in history, but he didn't look like someone who had magic. But Lilith herself did not look like an ordinary child with her large diamond eyes and silver-colored hair. The girl kept missing one detail, but she couldn't figure out what that detail was until she talked to the knight. She began to struggle and ask to be heard, but she began to feel a little sick from such vigorous activity. The impulse was restrained, and so she began to say that she was absolutely ordinary and that they had clearly mixed everything up and misunderstood. Her father was an ordinary man, James Brown, and not some Enoch Rubinstein. She ended up in a novella called The Doss Rebellion, which apparently took place before the original events began. She began to explain that her eyes and hair came from her mother, and her father had nothing to do with it. The knight noted that the girl was smart. He did not believe her, but the further development of events already surprised her. She heard her father's voice calling her. The writer was glad to see his main goal. James immediately understood everything. He took out a knife and ordered the man to let his daughter go. She, realizing that this might be the case, immediately began to show her father so that he would stop. They were commoners and couldn't speak to them like that, so she immediately began to ask for forgiveness for her father. She tried to save him, but no one listened to her at all because she knew the least about everything here. She chattered incessantly, trying to smooth things over somehow, but instead she was only thrust into the hands of some knight. The rider dismounted from his horse and headed straight towards that very James Brown. He didn't believe her. He couldn't know whether she was lying or simply didn't know. The girl was not telling the truth. Brown immediately raised his sword. He was not friendly. He knew that nothing would happen to him. There was still the question of why he had come to them, although the answer was also, by order of the king. Lilith couldn't believe it. Enoch Rubinstein was summoned by the emperor to do his duty. But 7 years had already passed, and James didn't understand why they didn't just end it all. He knew that after his escape, he would immediately be put on the wanted list. Deserters were subject to the death penalty. However, the emperor held him in high regard for all his previous merits and abilities, and therefore spared him. Lilith listened attentively, not understanding anything, but she had read the novella and more than once. Despite his clear violation of military law, no arrest warrant was issued and his property was not confiscated. The emperor himself ordered to convey that Enoch Rubinstein must return to the capital today. The man was silent and listened attentively, didn't even move, only smiled at the end, somehow poisonously. She heard her father call the emperor's bluff, both then and now. It seemed that he had crossed the line. It was time to get out and run away. It was decided to bite the man. He, of course, dropped her, clutching his sore arm, and she flew down, falling. It's good that she didn't have to fall for long. She immediately got up and started running to help her father. But she couldn't escape. The rider grabbed her by the scruff of the neck, lifting her off the ground. The escape plan failed, but she still tried to calm her father down, still not understanding that nothing would be done to him. Then she turned to that same dark-haired knight to clarify the situation. She started, of course, with an apology, and then began asking for forgiveness and asking to save her father's life. She still didn't understand that they weren't mistaken. She believed that they got confused because of the color of their hair and eyes. She agreed to cooperate with them. She agreed to everything. They would see that they were wrong. The man couldn't believe her words. The girl simply didn't know anything. She was ready to do anything for her dad. True, in a second she heard a strange sound, turning back towards James. Something was wrong. In a second, some lightning and sparks began to appear around him. The appearance began to change. In his hands was that glowing stick. She looked in shock, not believing her eyes. What a fool she now looked like in front of everyone. Still the same azure eyes and silver-tinged hair, Mr. James, I think. A 27-year-old single father living in a mountain village, raising his daughter alone. She couldn't believe that her father was the strongest character in this story. The writer ordered his subordinate to make sure that the child was not harmed and then to let him go to his father. The girl laughed awkwardly in the knight's arms and, apologizing, said that she had only just found out. Enoch, taking hold of his weapon more firmly, attacked the writer. But the writer himself did not understand such behavior. Disobedience was punishable by death, but he was playing around. But Enoch himself could not understand how someone weaker than him could force him to submit. Only 2 blows were accurate, wounding the enemy, who was no longer able to answer the question. He started screaming, saying that he couldn't touch his daughter. Blood began to flow down his cheek. He listened to him, not knowing what to answer because she was deciding on matters of state importance. However, they were able to calm him down. The knight put a knife to his daughter's throat, ordering her to stop. He immediately froze, squinting angrily. They ordered him to follow them. Did he have a choice? The so-called Holy Order? They threatened him with the life of his little daughter. How ironic. The rider knelt down and said that they were simply carrying out the king's orders to deliver at any cost. He had renounced this name long ago and had no intention of returning to the capital. He asked that this be conveyed to the emperor, but this was not a case in which he had the right to choose. He held the blade to the man's throat. Disobeying the emperor's orders was punishable by death. The child was in their hands, and so he had to surrender if he wanted her to be safe. The little girl didn't understand anything. She needed to make sense of everything. Her father was the main character. That is, she was part of the man's history. She remembered that he lost his young daughter. Together with her, he lost a part of himself, how she wanted to return to that quiet life. Now everything became clear. All that was left was to figure out how to fix everything it was worth going to the capital. The girl started screaming that her father would return to the Order of the Holy Knights, and at home she threw a tantrum. She had to somehow persuade her dad, but she didn't understand why he lied to her about her mom. In fact, Enoch wasn't even angry at his daughter. He was sorry that he had to deceive her, but she turned out to be so smart. He rocked her in his arms, telling her that she was a very smart girl for defending him so bravely. The knights stood outside and waited for them to come out. The fools believed them and released the hostage. While his daughter was with him, he was not afraid of anything. Now he needed to pack his things and leave unnoticed. It seems that the father was serious. He wanted to get away, but Lilith was not satisfied with this option. She stopped her father and asked him to return to the capital with her and become a knight. She wanted to live with pride for her family, with her dad, go to the academy and receive the sign of giftedness. The man looked at her and did not understand how she knew everything, how she knew all the subtleties. She blinked and said that Uncle Joe, Aunt Susan's husband, had told her everything. He didn't allow himself to think that she was lying. He needed to talk to her. He took her by the shoulders, telling her about the life of an aristocrat. He knew that this day had to come. He ran away anyway, ran away knowing that the people standing behind the door would find him. He didn't want her to have a gifted life. Their life seemed like a paradise with many privileges. But they all lived on the battlefield, giving their lives for the empire, hunting magical creatures or simply fighting. He kept remembering the days when he said goodbye to his comrades the day after they met. He didn't want his daughter to live the same life as him. He didn't want to lose her. He remembered the day he saw her for the first time. She became his world in that moment. He couldn't think that he could lose the whole world, his own world, his little daughter. She now understood Enoch, understood his feelings a little more strongly. She needed to help her dad. But she knew that if her father did not return, the country would fall. He, Enoch Rubinstein, could not escape. In the original version, the man returned to the Order to avenge the death of his daughter. Cheshure carefully planned the rebellion of the Knights of the Holy Order and provoked a revolution in the country. Therefore, after 10 years, all the common people died because the king ordered the extermination of the common people. Only her father could stop the genocide of civilians without magical abilities. If father leaves now, Cheshure will still make a revolution, but he will not save people. She understood that she could not allow devastation in the country. It was necessary to return her father to the capital. His daughter herself said that she loved their calm and carefree life, but she changed her mind. She understood that upon returning to the capital, she could become a gifted aristocrat. She could eat more than just pasta every day, wear lots of dresses and ribbons with bows. Yes, she pressed on the most painful part in order to persuade her father, but it was all for his own sake. They were returning to the castle, but came across 2 children beating up a 3rd boy. They immediately fell at his feet and began to greet him, but Enoch only asked what was going on. They apologized for the noise and said that the commoner had not greeted them as he should have. Lilith couldn't believe it. They hit the child because he simply didn't say hello to them. He began to say that he was an octave, the 4th rank among the 6 available, but she only froze, thinking. Lilith didn't believe that this could happen. Enoch simply drove the children away, frightening them by saying that he would deal with them himself. They were simply frightened and, having said goodbye as they should, hurried out of sight. Enoch wanted to say something to his daughter, but she immediately ran to help the boy who was beaten. The child wiped the blood from his face, looking somewhere to the side. His ruby-colored eyes were lifeless. She extended her hand with a handkerchief to wipe the baby's blood. She wanted to help. But he didn't need help, and it seemed like no one needed it. She only apologized for touching the baby so suddenly, not knowing what the right thing to do was. She left the scarf with the hair on the boy's leg and walked away, deciding that it was not worth touching him since he was against it. She looked at him carefully. He had just been beaten. He was clearly in pain, but she couldn't tear herself away. The ruby eyes were so captivating, and the face, although battered, was immensely beautiful and attractive. True, as soon as she looked at his face, she immediately remembered those red eyes and black hair. One rule that remains constant in all novels is that there is no such thing as helping unimportant characters. This boy was someone important. She asked his name, but there was still no answer. He remained silent. Enoch personally extended his hand to him, offering to help, asking if he could stand up, but he managed on his own. The child bowed and silently left, not accepting the man's help, although he left with difficulty. Enoch himself did not allow himself to be touched, the wayward child, but Enoch did nothing. The girl called him, but the Duke stopped her, holding her in place. They shouldn't have followed him. There were many people who did not like or recognize the nobles, and there was indeed a reason for that. He felt uncomfortable. They should have just left things as they were and not bothered him. Azure eyes looked into the distance, seeing the child off. Lilith understood that she had entered a world inside a novel. Now it was definitely so. It seems that this was supposed to be that very first meeting, which was described as an accident. She asked her dad on the way if she could be friends with whoever she wanted, but he didn't understand her right away. She was a noblewoman. Could she still be friends with ordinary people, like with Aunt Susan and her husband? She squeezed her dad's hand tighter, worrying about something and immediately going into her own thoughts. But Enoch said that she could be friends with whoever she wanted, as long as they were good people. The father was ready to make his daughter happy. She needed that boy with red eyes. She said she was worried about him and couldn't stop thinking about where he had gone. Lilith wanted to be friends with him, so she needed help in finding this boy. She needed him. He definitely created an angel. His daughter was very kind, although he didn't really know everything. He promised to help her find the boy. Had he ever told her no? She remembered that in the original storyline, the boy lived in the estate of Marquis Onyx. She promised herself that she would find the boy and help him. At this time, there was a debate going on in the Marquis's estate. The boy screamed and demanded that the child be thrown out of the house because he couldn't stand him. He listened as they pointed fingers at him and decided whether to let him live or throw him out of the house. They couldn't kick him out. He could have been tested for his abilities, and then they would have found out that he was his son. Then he could become not only the father of an illegitimate child, but also the one who threw him away like trash. He was worried that his father would announce his existence to the whole world, but he was wrong. He planned to lock him up and keep his existence a secret, but even this did not suit the capricious son. He told him that he did not dare to kill him. The rest did not interest him at all. He did not intend to interfere. The guy in the tailcoat looked at the beaten boy, who stood with his head bowed and silently listening. He swung, grabbing him by his torn clothes, and began shouting insults in his face. The guy was silent, didn't even turn away, watched as the fist flew at him. It flew slower and slower. He wanted it all to end so much. He didn't understand why he couldn't even die, whether he was really that weak. He immediately felt a napkin in his hands, and as he raised it to his face, an image of a girl with blue eyes appeared before his eyes. It was the kerchief of that noblewoman. It was not clear why he took it, but it made his soul feel warmer. It seemed like he just wanted to die, wanted to not feel all this pain, humiliation, and suffering. Lilith met her relatives, and first they showed her her two cousins, the children of Enoch's sister. She immediately understood who they were talking about. They were the heirs of Anstrus, mischievous guys, but good ones. They were twins, two heirs of the Anstrus ducal family, a magical swordsman and a holy knight. Her aunt brought the girl to the brothers' chambers, though she said that one of them was a little weak, but otherwise everything was fine. The door opened and the woman, smiling warmly, called her sons. Both boys died in the end, almost the only ones Cheshure opened his heart to. Their deaths were a blow to Cheshure. One way or another, the boys looked absolutely identical. Lilith froze, trying to understand if this was true. Their mother laughed at the girl's reaction. She was not the first to react that way. She sometimes confused them herself. Enoch's daughter looked up at the boys. One of them was Theo, and the other was named Leon. Theo was the first to say hello. His eyes were just like Lilith's. It seemed that this was a distinctive feature of the Rubinsteins. In the original story, Theo died first, which was upsetting because he was such a good guy. Theo was destined to become a holy knight, but he was too kind, soft, and fragile for this position. He died after being knighted due to a rare congenital disease. The girl greeted him in return, for which she was lovingly patted on the head, but Leon somehow didn't risk going to her. He just noticed that she was too small for a 7-year-old child. He hit a nerve. He decided that she was lying, but their mother prevented a fight by saying that Leon was very different from his brother. Leon was extremely mischievous, a real fidget who was impossible to keep track of. Although he denied his mother's words, he immediately fell silent as soon as he was hit on the top of the head. After all, his mother's hand was heavy. Leon was a future magical knight. He had a violent character and therefore often argued with Cheshure, although he loved him more than anyone else. In the second volume of the original story, Leon died in a battle to exterminate monsters, leaving Cheshure to follow in his brother's footsteps. He was performing in front of Cheshure and took a blow that wasn't meant for him, and the memories brought back sadness. Leon, even with his playful nature, was a good guy and she wanted to be friends with him. She even agreed to catch spiders with him. She wanted to become closer to her brothers. She needed to. Leon looked at her without answering. It was all strange, and the ballerina had already said the same thing. He wanted to squeeze her cheek, but he slightly misjudged his strength. The girl almost at the same second began to scream in pain, as if he wanted to tear off her cheek. The guy pulled his hand back as soon as he heard the scream and walked away. It was not for nothing that he didn't like her. She didn't even understand why she was crying. It was painful, but quite bearable. Leon walked away, not knowing what to say, but Theo ran to calm the baby down, to somehow fix the situation. The mother immediately scolded her son, telling him to apologize, but he couldn't even say anything because he didn't mean it out of malice. Leon apologized, but she began to say that everything was fine. She didn't want to upset her brother. It seemed that he was getting a lot of grief because of his character, so she decided to console him. She just asked him to be a little softer next time, smiled warmly at the guy, but he still frowned. And then he turned away completely. She touched him after all. He liked her, although he didn't recognize her. Night was falling on the capital. The setting sun illuminated the Rubinstein castle before its sunset. The table was full of all sorts of dishes that she had not seen in all 7 years, or perhaps in her entire past life. They placed a plate with a dish in front of her and wished everyone a bon appetit. The aunt told the girl to eat more. After all, life in the village was not so easy. There were a lot of utensils. She had absolutely no knowledge of etiquette, so she decided to simply repeat after her brothers. The meal was briefly interrupted by the arrival of the grandfather. The aunt immediately asked where her brother was, after greeting the father. The man said that he would join him when he finished with his things, and they should start dinner. The girl was very nervous. It was exciting. The nobles really lived well. The first one that grandfather touched was Leon, who immediately tensed up. The boy made a noise in the castle again, but his mother immediately stood up for him. Lilith listened attentively and seemed to have forgotten all about food. Leon apologized to Lady Ballerina, but grandfather decided to remind her that he, too, was a Rubinstein. He listened with his head bowed, understanding that his grandfather was right about something. He even felt a little ashamed. He should have behaved sensibly. People should have looked up to him, just like his grandfather. As in the original, the grandfather was a nobleman to the core, and therefore did not tolerate anything that went beyond the bounds of decency. It was time for her to start crying. She had no idea about etiquette and didn't understand how to eat steak. She thought to wait a little, but Leon, who was sitting next to her, immediately began to ask why she hadn't eaten. It was time to think of something. Countess Elena was a mathematics teacher, not the most important, but not the last character in this novel. Having received the test questions in her hands, she quickly coped with it. Well, she needed to find Cheshure urgently. Of course, she immediately began to thank the teacher, saying that it was all her merit. She denied everything, in fact, because only one lesson had passed, and she hadn't even explained anything to her. She still couldn't understand how a child could know so much at his age. All that was left was to smooth things over. The teacher looked at her attentively as she asked her to tell her more. Lilith was truly a genius, a natural talent for them. In general, they were partly right. She said that from now on she would help the girl with her studies and would do everything possible for her. At that moment she did not know, could not even imagine, that this action would become a lever leading to disaster. She sat there satisfied. The food was truly delicious, just like her dad cooked for her in the village. They fed her sweets, admiring how she squinted cutely. Leon joked that Lilith looks like a squirrel when she eats. Her aunt told her to eat slowly and carefully because she might get a stomachache. They were distracted from their pleasant lunch hour by the arrival of Countess Ballerina, which greatly alarmed Leon. True, Countess Ballerina did not arrive alone, but with her lady-in-waiting. Leon immediately grabbed a pillow and hid behind little Lilith, who looked up from the sweets in surprise. She couldn't understand what was going on, and Theo told her that Leon didn't like Miss Erica. It's all because a few days ago Leon tried to scare her with a spider, but he failed. They were distracted from their conversation by a melodic voice calling Leon it was that same Erica. She ran to the blonde but found him in the company of a person she didn't know. She immediately began to find out who it was, and tension hung in the air. The guy didn't understand at all why she was interested in this. Lilith thought that she was in some kind of romance. That was the case, by the way, but let's get back to the point. The lady who accompanied Erica reported that his cousin was next to him. She immediately extinguished her anger, understanding what was happening. It was, of course, awkward. She forgot about the return of Leon's cousin. Well, apparently Enoch Rubinstein really did come back. It surprised her. It was strange that she wasn't reminded. She immediately ran up to the girl to establish contact with her so that there would be a reason to become friends with the guy. She said hello and introduced herself by name, although she had already been introduced, and said that she was almost starting to feel jealous. The blue-eyed girl introduced herself in response, making a compliment there was no point in arguing with her yet. The blonde thanked him, and for some reason, to Leon's indignation, said that she had promised to spend her life with him. The guy was completely against it. He couldn't stand this girl, but he couldn't say it to her face because of his grandfather. She immediately outlined her goal. This girl seemed superficial and stupid to Lilith. Night fell on the castle. Everything around became quiet, preparing for sleep, and only Lilith's father, full of enthusiasm, burst into his daughter's room. It seemed that the door would not withstand such impulses from the father, but he did not care about this. Father didn't even have dinner. He was at work all day and then went straight to his princess. She praised her dad. He shouldn't have skipped meals. She also ate a lot of delicious things today with her aunt and brothers. She told him how her day had gone, while her father laughed and listened, pleased with his daughter's happiness. He decided to find out the main thing that had caused him so much alarm. Lilith was supposed to study all day today. True, she only studied until 3, but she was still able to surprise the teacher. In fact, my father's plans were only to teach etiquette, but my grandfather added additional classes. The girl had to grow up smart. He was right, and she was not angry with him, so she hastened to calm her dad down. She said how interesting and fun it was for her, and he listened and couldn't stop admiring it, because the teacher praised her too. His daughter was a real treasure to him, and it was strange for her to receive praise for this. But what can you do? She was only 7 years old, but she happily sank into her dad's arms. She was definitely Daddy's little girl and took after her dad. They lay on the bed hugging each other for a long time. The man was very tired from work all day, but he always found time and energy for his beloved daughter. She was pleased that her dad was proud of her to refuse. That would have been a real sin. She was ready to take her words back. It was nice to receive praise from her father. She was a genius, yes. In fact, she was not a genius at all, and there was a reason for that. She listened attentively to the man to whom she was brought, or whether he was brought to her, it is not clear. It was a certain Robert Quinn. He worked in the Magic Tower, in the department that studied the abilities of gifted people. She was a little nervous, although there was no reason, but her dad was nearby, supporting her. He would never allow anyone to hurt his daughter or harm her in any way. She just needed to answer questions, not be afraid if she didn't know something, and speak honestly. He remembered the teacher's words that she would not be able to teach his daughter. There was a reason for that. His daughter was a genius with knowledge far beyond that of the teacher himself, so he should have contacted the Magic Tower. The grandfather listened to the teacher and contacted the Magic Tower. He wanted to check the level of his granddaughter's abilities. True, the man did not consult with her father about this and did not ask Lilith herself, but the grandfather did this for his son as well. Father understood that grandfather did this so that he could act more freely, but he still wanted to ask Lilith. Grandfather was not so kind and simply told me to do the same as yesterday and not to be nervous. She, lost in thought, went too far. This whole situation developed this way because of a math lesson. When it came to magic, knowledge of formulas was required, and they were created by workers of the magic tower. The problem was that they were all mathematical geniuses, and so the tower was looking for children gifted in this science. They were watched by Oscar Manuel, the youngest head of the magic tower in its history. But this was one of the most important characters. She met him too quickly. Oscar was literally their enemy, although he did not go against his father. It all started when his father began to prepare an uprising. He gathered high-ranking gifted people. Nobles and politicians were on his side. But he was unable to convince the head of the magic tower. It was not for nothing that she met with him. Oscar never helped his father until the very end, although supporting the tower could have helped end the revolution 3 years earlier. The decision was made to get into the tower and gain Oscar's trust. She needed to continue being a genius. But Oscar himself still didn't show any friendliness, believing that all of this was just childish nonsense. He demanded that everything be checked thoroughly, his amber eyes glowing unkindly. Imagine the girl's surprise when she saw the problem. It was a linear equation for a 7-year-old child. The guy was clearly obsessed with the illusion of a world where he was a genius. She couldn't solve it. Not even because she couldn't. That would have raised suspicions. Fortunately, many genius children couldn't solve it at the age of 7. Her father began to praise her, saying that it was simply too difficult a task, and her grandfather patted her on the head. But Oscar did not agree with the men, believing that he had wasted his time on some idiot. True, he shouldn't have said this in front of her father, who was ready to tear everyone apart for his daughter. Enoch Rubinstein immediately ordered the tower leader to stop and look at him, his voice steely. The diamond eyes burned with a blue flame from anger, but the amber in the eyes opposite was unshakable. He demanded an apology to his daughter, but he replied that they should apologize to him for wasting his precious time. But Enoch knew perfectly well that he had come uninvited. There was no point in his appearance. He thought she should have been stronger since she was the daughter of that same Enoch Rubinstein, but she turned out to be the same. But even her great father at her age could not do the same. Oscar did not give up. He decided this at her age. As if there was a whiff of a lie, let's say decently, the man demanded an apology. But as soon as he refused, he started shouting, and his grandfather stopped him in time. Grandpa said that he was sorry about what happened, and suggested leaving everything as it was. After all, he was wiser than the brat. But Oscar also touched him, saying that the sharp mind he respected so much was no longer there. Nordic had grown old. The man had a hard time holding back his son, who was ready to tear him apart. Lilith agreed with her father. The man was not stingy with insults, calling the child a talentless individual, just like many other children. She couldn't believe what she heard. He even brought up the topic of her father's departure. She couldn't keep silent, but she could calm this scoundrel down. She needed 5 minutes to solve the problem. Just 5 minutes. Oscar Manuel looked down on her, and no, not because she was so small, although that was part of it too. But she agreed to do this only if he apologized to her family for all the harsh words. Father was ready to rip the chapter, but Lilith decided to rip it in her own way. Everyone watched the girl attentively, her amber eyes running over the calculations on the board. The answer is 17. The head of the magic tower was 17 years old. Lilith Rubinstein solved the problem. The man was completely defeated, and all that was left was to admit his defeat. The head of the magic tower bowed low, asking for forgiveness for the insult he had spoken. And the girl thought that he would start to get indignant, but he so calmly admitted his mistake. But his amber eyes still blazed with fire. Madness sparkled in them. He had something to offer them. She couldn't understand why life was treating her like this, remembering her dinner with Oscar Manuel. He offered to train her for them, and she agreed, thinking it would be a great way to attract him to them. She was pulled out of her thoughts by the sound of the door opening, which scared her terribly. The man patted his stomach and, hiccuping, thanked her for the past dinner. It was as if he had been replaced. She couldn't even understand what exactly had happened to him. He had changed so much. It seemed as if there was another person in front of her. His eyes looked kindly. He decided that they should work a little longer. The girl was quite talented. Each point in space had its own coordinates to create a magic formula. Knowledge of mathematics was required. Namely, the ability to express the concept of space mathematically. That is, it was necessary to have an idea of vectors. The magic turned out to be quite systematic. He decided to start by explaining numbers less than 0. The girl decided to pretend that she didn't know anything, and so she sat and thought, staring at the piece of paper with the example. He looked at her boredly, waiting for an answer, wanting to tell her about the concept of negative numbers. Unconsciously, he called the girl little, lost somewhere in his thoughts, and she did not understand what he was talking about. He talked about her. It was amazing how his behavior changed. She didn't immediately understand what to say, how to react to this at all, and he was talking about her height. For a 7-year-old, she was unnaturally small, absolutely tiny. Lilith noted that she was indeed smaller than her peers, but there was a reason for that. He might have known something, or she might have been wrong about this, and he might have assumed that it was all due to poor nutrition. She knew a lot about him, but she didn't understand this character. He either didn't know anything or he was hiding behind this nonsense. He suggested that she would work with him in the future, which could make her life more convenient. It seems that this change in behavior was due to the fact that she demonstrated her abilities. By the way, Oscar Manuel was not the first to comment on her height, which was very annoying. It turned out that there was a reason for her slow growth, but she was not the protagonist's daughter. In fact, she was just a minor character who was supposed to die. But still, there was something that didn't fit into my head, but it was worth thinking about tomorrow. Now my father told me to get ready for bed. Lilith, sitting in bed, waited for her dad, who was getting ready for them to go to bed. Today, she showed real class. Even Grandpa was smiling from ear to ear. It was truly a miracle. Grandfather taught him to behave with restraint and coldness, but today he couldn't hold back his smile. It seemed like it was time for everyone to go to bed, but Lilith couldn't fall asleep. She had something to think about. Enoch decided that his daughter couldn't sleep, so he took a book to read her a bedtime story. The tale was about a princess locked in a tower, if the title is to be believed, of course. The man sat down more comfortably, hugging his daughter, and began to read. He liked to read something to her, and she endured it. The tale told of a good king and his princess daughter, whom he loved so much. It was like that with Lilith and her dad. As soon as the princess turned 7, she was kidnapped by an evil king from a neighboring kingdom. Before the princess's eyes was the image of the king crying every day from grief. The girl's father was ready to do anything to get her back. But the evil king was adamant. The story was very similar to the novel itself, where the girl ended up. The good king, consumed with grief over his loss, one day met a boy who was very strong. The good king accepted him as a son, wanting to raise him as an older brother to his princess. She had questions. Everything was turning out too predictably. She needed to find out what would happen next. One day, the evil king told the good king that the princess had fallen ill and died. Enoch was just about to stop when Lilith demanded to continue. The evil king could be lying. The evil king, having learned of the death of his daughter, became furious and decided to take revenge on him with the help of the prince. Together with the prince, the good king defeated all the villains and avenged his daughter by capturing the evil king. This scene was very familiar to him, only that day it was not the evil king who stood against the good king. His daughter came out against him, but whether it was, she remained a question. Enoch went to the battlefield many times to get his daughter back until he learned that she had died. He turned his sword towards the emperor. His daughter lived with a secret identity, and the emperor, upon learning, used his power. And the daughter, deceived by the emperor, began to recklessly kill people. Enoch wanted to get his daughter back, but could not find a way. But someone was able to stop her. The duke decided to read the tales himself before telling them to his daughter. This story was not the best for the little girl, but the girl herself had a different opinion. She thought the ending was happy despite all this, but Enoch himself thought differently. She believed that the good king destroyed the bad kingdom and therefore everyone was happy. But the good king himself was unhappy, which means it won't be a happy ending. The main character was not happy. Even though the princess killed many people, she was brainwashed. Could a father who had lost his daughter be happy? Of course he couldn't. That's what Enoch was talking about. The ending was not at all happy, as Lilith assumed. In the original story, everything also ended sadly. Yet she remembered that Lilith's death at the hands of Cheshure had marked the beginning of the birth of a new empire. Now she thought about her father, how he lived in a country built on the grave of his daughter, and if she were a princess and he was a good king, how would he live after her death? The father would not have been able to live without his princess at all, and therefore could not even think about it. The good king thought so too, which is why the story didn't end so well. It's just that the good king didn't follow her right away, but decided to do it after revenge. She couldn't understand at all how her dad could say that, and he just laughed. This could only be understood by becoming a parent. He would definitely follow his princess if he lost her. He could not live without her. She, of course, went on strike, but Enoch only laughed, asking Lilith to calm down. It was just a fairy tale. But it was difficult to say whether this was true. Everything was supposed to happen this way in the original novel. She wondered why she shouldn't go to the battlefield, even though all the gifted ones had to go to the battlefield. She was gifted too. She had to go according to the law, but Dad had a plan. She still understood what Dad was talking about. He was going to ask the Emperor to release her from service. In return, Enoch himself would become the Emperor's dog, who would obey the Emperor without any protests. The good king could do nothing but become the servant of the evil king to save the princess. Enoch couldn't be free in any case, and it was all because of her, no matter whether she was kidnapped or not. Now she realized that she was not the pretext for the original story. Every action of the Duke was because of her. The good ending of the story was a tragedy for the protagonist, who eventually lost his purpose. Now she realized that she had to not only help her dad create a peaceful ending, she had to survive. The empire was divided into ranks because of the gifted, the highest being Dos, followed by Quarter, Septima, Octave, Nona, and mere mortals. Primera was a source of magic, a being close to God who was born only in the family of the emperor. None of the emperor's 14 children turned out to be exemplary, which led to rumors against the emperor's reputation. Emperor Nicholas von Pavilion, who ruled the Pavilion Empire, was 48 years old. It seems that he might not have been born at all, or might not have been born into his family, but the emperor was young and could have seen the next example. The emperor knew that Enoch had returned with his daughter. It was to his advantage he endured for a long time, but it seems not in vain. The next morning for Lilith began with getting ready for the classroom. School was waiting for her. She was short and didn't grow at all. This needed to be fixed somehow, otherwise questions would start to arise. Everyone could soon understand the reason for such slow growth. In general, she had a plan that needed to be carried out quickly to save Cheshure, unite, and get into the Institute for the Development of Abilities. Her servants told her that only the Emperor could open the center of power in the hearts of talents. She needed to start absorbing life force sooner so she could start growing like everyone else. The maid said that the 12th prince was also not an example. The people were in confusion. Faith in the Emperor was fading. Lilith left, thinking about the words of the maids. She knew that an example would not be born in the Emperor's family. He was already born in a different family. There was no longer any way to put off the rescue plan, but one of the maids stopped her. She asked where the outpatient clinic was. Nothing could stop her. There was a young boy sitting in the outpatient clinic, resting and snoring. Almost no one came here. However, his peace was disturbed by the arrival of Lilith Rubinstein, who came to see a certain Flynn. He was flattered that she knew his name, and she even brought him flowers as a gift. She needed his help with something. Although she was not sick, these were the tears of fairies. He realized that she was talking about salvacin. It was a pretty good medicine. It was a rare medicinal plant that was closely monitored by the royal family, who gave it to several families once a month. The Rubinstein family was among them, and Lilith, being the direct heir of this family, could well take advantage of it. She wrote her name on the piece of paper Flynn gave her while the doctor himself collected some for her. She collected everything in her backpack and, thanking the doctor, immediately walked away. Now all that was left was to figure out how to sneak past my father without being caught. She needed an escort to go outside, otherwise she would simply be dragged back. She needed someone who could accompany her and protect her while she was away from home, and the solution was found quickly. Jetty and June, her servants, could not be trusted. Her personal guard was no good either. Mr. Lewis had also fallen away, leaving her brothers. Brothers Theo and Leon were the best option for Lilith now. They wouldn't ask many questions. The twins were very gifted. Their rank was Dos. They were the strongest after their father. The girl sat and cried that she wanted to eat, but in the palace there was no food that her father fed her in the village. They looked at her, wondering what to do, but they didn't want to upset the girl in any way. She fondly remembered the food her father and Aunt Susan cooked for her. They wanted to ask the cook to cook something for her, but he hardly knew what ordinary people ate. The brothers suggested going to a regular restaurant, so after a couple of minutes they were climbing out through a secret passage. True, along the way Theo got a headache. Lilith didn't immediately understand what exactly was wrong, but Leon did. It seemed that the headaches were starting again. This was not a good sign. My brother should return to his quarters and lie down. Theo had a rare disease. The attacks lasted for 5 days. He conceived it as an assistant to Cheshure, who was then supposed to die. Theo was in pain from the clash of mana, the divine and magical energy colliding, causing severe convulsions. However, the disease had a cure, which Cheshure found long after Theo's death. It was the heart of the saints, a metaphor he couldn't figure out. And she wouldn't have figured it out herself, except that she had read the novel and knew what it was. She could save Theo, and therefore prevent his death and help Cheshure not lose his brother. She knew Theo wouldn't refuse her, so she asked him to go with her and buy her something cool. On the way, she saw Will Duncan's shop and asked to go there. There was something that could save Theo. It was the biggest store on the alley. They were sure to have a saint's heart. While the guys were looking around, Lilith was looking for that very thing. Fortunately, it turned out not to be so difficult. It was in plain sight. Lilith immediately pointed her finger and said that she wanted him. The reaction was, of course, expected, but they had persuaded people to do worse. The purple color shimmered so beautifully it looked like the stars in the night sky, just like her eyes. The seller explained that it was a monocore extracted from the body of a slain beast, and would not be suitable for a noble lady. She wanted Theo to buy it for her, but he was against it, worried about his sister. It was dangerous. It wasn't worth the risk. The man said that it wasn't ordinary glass, but something that seals mana, but Lilith demanded her own, no matter what. Of course, she was refused, so she had to take extreme measures, all for the sake of her brother. It was time to use your childish privileges. Only children could burst into tears, lying on the floor. Theo looked at the check. Leon muttered behind him, saying that their mother would kill them, but they had no other choice. Lilith looked at him with beady eyes, thanking him for the beautiful thing. Theo was glad to please his little sister. The restaurant they went to, Rico's, was on 13th Street in the Valentine area. Leon and Theo couldn't believe she ate that when she lived in Xenon. It didn't look very tasty. In fact, this restaurant was visited by Enoch Rubinstein in the original. She was able to find it quite easily. The only thing left to do was to find him. Theo asked the girl to take the order, which was just in time. She approached them and asked what the young guys wanted. Leon asked for everything on the menu. But as soon as she left, Lilith immediately stopped her, asking her to prepare something special for her. The only thing Theo told her was not to raise her voice to commoners outside the house. Leon said that there was no point in scolding her like that, since her grandfather wasn't around, and Theo said that she should be taught now, so that her grandfather wouldn't scold her later. She looked at her tenderly and asked her to do something for her. She placed a coin on the table and moved it towards the redhead. The place was disguised as an ordinary restaurant. But she shouldn't abuse her power. She needed information from the Red Hawk Guild. She asked if they had any sour herring. You should have seen the brothers' faces at that moment. The girl bowed politely and said that we would cook it if the guest wanted, and then asked about the recipe. She said she would tell her the recipe while she was cooking, and the girl led her into the kitchen, where she opened a secret door. That same Rico sat in a mask, as if he was waiting for her. She walked inside with excitement. Rico hated those who had power, abilities, and status. The man invited her to sit opposite him. She thanked him, looking around. She asked to give her a few seconds to calm down, and Rico immediately asked how the child knew about this place. To buy information you had to pay, and then she offered to pay her for this information. Pay not money, but information in return equivalent to what she was looking for, Rico laughed. It was time to get to the point. Rico accepted prepayment. It was worth paying a commission for the agreement before receiving the information. She decided that she could start with her father's return to the capital, but this did not work. She had to tell the truth. She came here to ask for a favor. She already knew everything, even that he had a son whom he hid from Marquis Onyx. She understood that the information was extremely inaccessible, but he did not understand how the girl found out about it. She had arrived here only 4 days ago, and already she had such information about what she wanted from him. She said she could save the child, but Enoch Rubinstein needed a letter. She needed a messenger, and the recipient was her father. It was very tempting. She said something about needing time. She said that her father would now be away for a long time taking care of family affairs in order to return to the Knights. He assumed that she had come here from the Duke himself, of course. It was necessary to assure him otherwise, since his father knew nothing. He understood the essence of her request, but he did not understand why she did not say everything herself. She noted that she would have to explain everything. and then he had to pay her something for this information. Everything was suspicious, but she had a way to convince him. What would it have cost him to inform Duke Enoch Rubinstein about the illegitimate child? Only she warned that her name had to be hidden so that no one would know that it was her. She wasn't that stupid. Rico laughed as he listened to this child's speech. It was funny. She understood that this would not be the first time she came here, and would reveal many secrets to her father. She needed to enlist the man's support. She handed him the package she took out of her backpack. She knew he didn't need the money, but she had something cooler. He unwrapped the package, looking at what Lilith had brought him. He himself did not believe what he saw. She gave him a universal antidote that could help cure his younger sister's illness. He couldn't understand what had happened. Was he one step ahead or one step behind? Everything was somehow suspicious. He couldn't understand what exactly the girl wanted and what the Duke had in mind. The atmosphere began to feel heavier. Of course she was scared. He took out a knife, but he just checked if fairy tears worked. This was kept by members of the royal family. Hundreds of millions would not have been enough to buy this plant. He understood that she could get caught for something like that, but she only asked him to use it more carefully. He removed his mask, revealing his face, which usually meant that the end had come for the person. The deal was made, but the redhead couldn't understand why Rico showed his face to this little girl. Green-Eyed reported that the girl came here with her older brothers. The man ordered that information about the descendant of the Onyx and the illegitimate child of Enoch Rubinstein be anonymously transmitted. She couldn't believe that he would do everything, but Salveson was extremely valuable, as was the life of his younger sister. The redhead didn't trust the girl. Everything was too strange. It seemed that the Duke was planning something. He remembered her words. She asked him to simply trust her. It seemed that even her request did not carry any malicious intent. She needed someone to pass her secret on to her father. Nothing more. He had everything under control. There was no need to worry. Looking at the sky through the window glass, he thought about his sister. It seemed the girl could help him. As she sat on the bed, she drew and recalled the man's words, that the Red Hawk's men were supposed to contact her. She wondered who exactly this person could be, one of the servants, but then she wanted this person to serve her. It would have been easier to keep in touch that way, but she was distracted from her thoughts by Jetty, who came and began to praise her drawing. She said it was a very beautiful jellyfish. It was nice, of course, but it was her father after all. She took a pencil and, with the princess's permission, began to draw herself. Lilith watched carefully. The drawing turned out wonderful. It turns out that June was a natural-born artist. The painted girl was a descendant of Marquis Onyx. Lilith was shocked, not seeing the connection. She said that she had drawn Rachel, her and Jetty's friend, who also worked as a maid for the Rubinstein family. Enoch was sitting at this time and studying the letter that had been sent to him. A week ago, he met a boy who made him uneasy. Everyone treated him as low-ranking, but he turned out to be not so simple. The message stated that it was the illegitimate child of Marquis Onyx. If he was being treated as badly as the letter said, then he needed to find him immediately. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his daughter who had arrived. I needed to visit the Marquises. It's a pity they weren't so close, then it would have been much easier. They were greeted very warmly, and the Marquis first introduced them to his wife and legitimate son. The excuse to visit them was found thanks to Lilith, who wanted to look at the sculptures from the Marquis's house. Lilith greeted that same Jonathan. She even had to shake his hand. The Duke noted that their children got along very well, but he was very much mistaken, although even the boy's mother said that they were suitable for each other. They already thought that they could get married, although Lilith and Enoch were not of that opinion at all. Jonathan invited the young Duchess to look at the works of art, and she came here almost for them. The Marquis said something about servants, and Milady immediately ran to greet him. She needed the key. They walked through the halls, looking at everything. Lilith was looking for a lock that would fit the key. Jonathan was a fourth ranker. He needed connections, and it was worth impressing the Duke. And so he tried to get close to his daughter, starting to tell her everything in detail. But she hardly listened to him. He didn't even really understand them, and he still had to keep an eye on her. Only with the last one there was a problem. The princess ran away, and the Marquis's heir failed to keep an eye on her. While Lilith was running around looking for Cheshure, he himself was lying locked on the second floor of the basement in the last room. The boy slept, frozen from the cold. The voice in his head did not give him peace. The ghost of his mother haunted him. It seemed that he had only one way out, to go to his mother in the next world. Jonathan said that his father would kill him if he came near the Duke, and no one was allowed to know about him. It seemed that my whole life would pass like this. Wouldn't it be easier to just die? There was no other way out. For some reason, he remembered that fair-haired angel who was rushing to help him. For some reason, he also took her handkerchief, a false hope of salvation, a ghostly warmth that he could not feel. He so hoped that God would send him an angel who would rescue him from this hell. He was right. The little angel found him after all, opening the door of the secret room to save him. Lilith opened the door, albeit with difficulty. Finding the boy sitting in the corner, she was able to. The guy looked at her, not believing his eyes. How could this girl get here? She didn't explain everything right away. She needed to get him out of here as quickly as possible. They should have come earlier, spit on everything, and brought Dad here, but everything was already done. All that remained was to save the boy. Every minute here was hell for him. There were tears in his eyes from his own carelessness and hopelessness. She asked him for forgiveness, and he could not understand why. Lilith extended her hand to him, wanting him to go with her. He didn't understand why she was helping him. He didn't understand if she could pull him out of this hell. The girl introduced herself, but it was not enough, nor was there time for explanations. They had to leave. She promised him a better life, and he had nothing to lose, so why not give it a try? Even if it wasn't heaven, then peace awaited him. As it seemed to him, everything was better than this hell. He resolutely extended his hand to her, and the girl did not immediately understand what it meant, but she herself had told him to give her his hand. She took his hand with both of her palms, wanting to lead him out of here. Everything was going as it should. She promised to help him and teach him all the lessons, but for now it was worth getting out of the basement. Although it was difficult, she was able to overcome the stairs. She just needed to catch her breath and rest for a minute. It was as if she had run a marathon, but the guy didn't care. He warned her that they would meet servants. She didn't care. Even if they were noticed, she found him. All that was left was to take him to his dad. The key had to be left on the second window opening in the corridor of the extension, so as not to expose the servants. True, due to her short stature, she could not reach him, but then Cheshure helped her. Now all that was left was to escape. All intermediate missions had been completed. At this time, an enraged Jonathan was looking for the girl he had lost. He understood what this threatened him with. Luckily, right on the way, he met Lilith and Cheshure, whom she saved. The guy decided to settle everything peacefully and suggested that she return to the room with the sculptures. She herself pushed the red-eyed man and told him to run. She had nothing to worry about. She also needed to run, but she was stopped by the Marquis's legitimate son. First, he grabbed her by the scruff of the neck, and then he tripped her up. He was a vile guy. It was no wonder she didn't like him. Lilith told him to run, but when he heard the knock, he froze. Turning around, Lilith was lying on the floor. She told him to run away, but he returned, although illegitimate, but the true son of the Marquis, who inherited his father's abilities. He turned out to be stronger than Jonathan, and therefore was able to defend himself and counterattack him. The guy politely gave the girl his hand, helping her up. She, of course, scolded him, but was grateful. She was worried that they wouldn't be able to escape, but in a second, they found themselves outside the annex building. In the original, all the powers belonged to the main characters. Cheshure was just like that and could slow down the blow. It was amazing that he could literally control time at his will. His opponent could slow down at any moment. At this time, Enoch Rubinstein was discussing something with Marcus Onyx, who praised him so much. The Duke, of course, thanked him for his understanding, but he himself tried to find at least some traces of the child's presence. Most likely, the child was hidden far from their eyes. He should have followed and looked at the exhibition hall. The Marquis agreed, offering to become his guide and show him everything personally. True, this was not necessary. Lilith's screams were heard behind the door. The girl burst into the office, opening the doors with all her might apparently. The adrenaline in her blood was off the charts. With her was the Cheshure they were looking for. She showed him the Cheshure they had recently seen. Enoch did not understand why the Marquise did not hide the child, and if he did, how Lilith found him. She said that she walked through the Marquise's rooms and found a child there. The Marquise's house was simply big. She said that she found him in the basement, but the conditions there were very bad. The Marquis began to look for excuses. He needed to smooth things over somehow, but there was no other way out. He realized that this was his illegitimate son. They should have talked in private without the children. Lilith and Cheshure were waiting for them in some room not far from the office. The Duke had to sort everything out. Rochelle gave her the ointment along with the note, now it was clear why, to help the boy. She asked him to bend over a little, but he refused, but no one has ever resisted her persuasion. The young lady began to carefully apply ointment to the boy's lips. He sat quietly and steadfastly endured everything. Lilith kept asking and asking, but the boy remained silent, not knowing what to answer, not used to being talked to. She didn't understand why he, having such abilities, didn't defend himself. He couldn't dodge. It certainly wouldn't have helped. It would have made him even more angry, and he would have gotten hurt even more. He had nowhere to go to survive. He had to endure beatings in this house. He had no status. He could not save himself. He decided to check if her father was Duke Rubinstein. Jonathan said something about getting closer to her father. But he wouldn't communicate with those who beat children. She said that they came here to look at the painting. She said that in fact she came here not because of the painting, but to save him. She smiled warmly at him. He was silent. Again did not know what to answer. Someone decided to take care of him. But he didn't understand why she was looking for him. She was already starting to worry that he had forgotten her, but he again remained silent. She said that she remembered that day, thought about him, wanted to see him and help him. He couldn't understand why, and she just appreciated him. She really liked him, that's all. Only he reacted strangely. She didn't even understand at first, but he thought that she saw him as her toy, to whom she would give shelter and food. But he was wrong. She was against this at all. Lilith promised that she would become his friend. Cheshure simply didn't understand how they could become friends if she was the Duke's daughter. It was as if he didn't want to be friends with her himself, although her dad told her otherwise, but she decided not to give in right away. Her thoughts were distracted by her father's voice calling her. He and Cheshure immediately approached their father to find out how everything went. The man looked at the boy. There was no hostility in his eyes. It was time for them to return home. Enoch left Lilith and Cheshure in the boys' room, which was just across from Lilith's room, so that they could see each other more often. The man told them to sit quietly until he spoke to their grandfather, and the girls' brothers joined them. They immediately asked who this boy was, since he was all beaten up, but she replied that it was Cheshure, her friend. The Duke said that Lilith's new friend would now live with them. Leon immediately asked where this boy came from. They didn't want to offend him, they were just curious, and even knowing that he was from the people, they didn't feel disgusted. Lilith's friend couldn't be bad. The Duke again reminded everyone to behave quietly and left in grandfather. Lilith wanted to play with Cheshure, but Leon grabbed her, reminding her that they were supposed to go catch spiders together. She wanted Cheshure to go with them. They needed to make him friends with the guys, but Leon insisted on going alone. But she still demanded to go with Cheshure, because they were supposed to get closer in the original. Luckily, she was helped by Theo, who decided to get to know him first. Leon, who was apparently jealous, said that he stunk, and it remained to somehow smooth over the situation the boy was upset. Out of nowhere, the Duke appeared, put his arm around the blushing boy's shoulders, and decided to take him swimming. The brothers were left to play with Lilith. He sorted everything out with his grandfather. Now he needed to get the boy in order. At this time, Lilith was ready to kill Leon, who was so rude after all, he was her friend. The brother was too rude and even reprimanded him, but he himself did not admit his guilt. Fortunately, Theo was able to resolve this conflict as well, calming down the brother and sister who were about to fight. Theo hastened to calm the little girl down, saying that Leon spoke to everyone like that, and it wasn't the boy's fault. It was a bad habit, Lilith asked, not to behave like that with Cheshure. He began to get angry. How could she protect him? He was her brother. It was like she had traded him in. She said she was going to see a movie, but she brought a new friend home. He didn't believe that he would live with us, but he had nowhere else to go. She understood that he didn't like something. She waited for him to tell her, but the guy just left without saying anything. It seemed like this could drag on for a long time. He recalled the words of the Marquis, who asked for one favor in case the boy got boring. He had to be disposed of carefully, so that no absurd rumors would start for people like the Marquis. Reputation was important. He looked at the boy, who was covered in wounds and abrasions. It seemed they had done a good job on him. The man tried to somehow lighten the mood and get the boy to talk, so that he would understand that he was not in any danger here. He shared some insignificant thoughts with him. It was necessary to earn the boy's trust. He decided that it was time to wash the boy, and so he began to soap his head, worried that he would not be able to do it himself. He decided that he had ordered his death, since he had lived so long only because of his daughter, who had taken a fancy to him. But everything was not so at all. He was not going to kill him or throw him out of the house. He decided to ask for something. He wanted some money. He promised to find a job in the future, return everything, and live quietly without disturbing anyone. He called the boy, who seemed to be getting ready, but children did not need to work. He was not going to leave the baby. He kept remembering his father's words when he spoke to him. He remembered how calm he was during his conversation, not even trying to stop his son. He couldn't believe that after so many years of missing and having problems, he agreed with him so easily. He was prepared for him to be against it, as it had been in his distant youth, where his son always argued with him and questioned everything. He still felt terrible about what they had gone through growing up, but becoming a father had given Enoch some understanding of his father. He realized that forcing the children to obey him was not the best decision, and he regretted it. If he had known that everything would result in 7 years of disappearance, he would never have done so. However, the son himself was grateful to his father for his patience and the decision he made then. Lilith was shocked to see the guy's excellent drawing skills. His drawing was beautiful. Lilith didn't understand how he could be so modest, saying that his skills weren't that talented. He noticed that Lilith's drawing looked like her father, at least someone. It turns out that she could have given this drawing to her dad, and Cheshure remembered the man's words that evening. She praised her dad so much that she offered Cheshure to become his son, but he was not sure that he could be accepted into the family. But he didn't need a family. He didn't want to get hurt like that. He wanted to go to bed. The boy thought about going to sleep in the servants' room, but Lilith insisted that he should not sleep there. She wished him good night and admired the face of the sleeping guy who, due to fatigue, did not respond in kind. It was decided to use Salvacin to heal his wounds before he woke up. The medicine worked almost instantly. All the bruises and wounds disappeared. She looked at him with warmth. The blue-eyed girl kept remembering the boy's words when he said that he didn't want a family for himself. But she knew that of all the characters, he dreamed most of all of a strong, happy family. The girl decided to tell him something in secret, but he was asleep anyway and didn't hear anything. He was the main character of this world, not even she or Duke Rubinstein, but Cheshure. Of course, the hero always faced difficulties. In order to overcome them, she decided to help him. Lilith promised herself, or he, it is not clear, but she promised that they would become one family. It was funny that the guy didn't sleep. He was listening to her the whole time. She was so strange. He was already counting the days until she would get tired of him and throw him out of the Duke's house. He was just a toy for her. In fact, he was glad to fall asleep without feeling hungry. He was still grateful to the young lady for her help. He did not want to die at the hands of his own father. At least that's what Cheshure thought until he heard her promise to be his family. His world was falling apart. A very strange child. It was unclear what to expect, whether he should be afraid. He didn't believe her, but he didn't understand why she was so kind if she was going to get rid of him later. The guy threw off the blanket, turning away from Lilith, who was already dreaming for the 10th time. It was more familiar this way. In general, he was used to falling asleep in the cold, but the Duke who came in didn't like this very much. The man carefully covered Cheshure. He drew very well, and in Lilith's drawing he also saw a jellyfish, oddly enough. After a few long seconds, he realized that the jellyfish in the picture was him. Hooray! The goal was achieved. Laughing, he kissed her before leaving. The next day was warm and sunny, and she was sitting in Oscar Manuel's class. At this time, Cheshure was sitting below in the sun and waiting for her, staring at one point and probably not blinking at all. The girl sat and wrote something. It was terribly boring. It would be better if she played now with the boy who was waiting for her. Even Oscar was already yawning, saying how bored he was. But he had to come. He had promised her father. She asked him to explain something, but he knew that the girl knew everything, even though she denied it. She had to go to the academy at the age of 9, but some could go there at the age of 7 if they wanted to. Her birthday was coming up soon. Oscar said that she was supposed to see her mother, but she didn't know anything about it. The girl thought about it. Her father always avoided answering this question. There was not a word about her in the novel. She decided to ask the owner of the magic tower about her mother. It was interesting. She solved the equations anyway. He noticed that this was the first time she had heard of her. Although her mother was popular, was it worth telling him about it? She was curious, so Oscar told her, by the way, the author already mentioned that she resigned. Marquise Selena Ledendorf was a famous magician who, after retiring 5 years ago, began working at a magic academy. Moreover, she gave birth to a son in her second marriage, and Lilith felt somehow strange. She was surprised. It seemed her mother didn't worry about her much. She lived happily in a marriage with another man. She decided that her mother was free to do whatever she wanted because she was young and talented, and Oscar just agreed. She was a very skilled magician, and the Marquise and her father married when the Duke was at his most powerful. There was almost no love in the marriages of the nobility, but it was still cruel because she was her daughter. She thought that her mother did this because she didn't know where she was. She was wrong. Her mother was the cause of everything. She was a young retired mage, granted by the Emperor in exchange for information about her and her father's whereabouts. The puzzle began to come together. For the sake of her son and herself, she said everything. Because of her, it all started. Because of her, Lilith was kidnapped. And she, working at the academy, knew everything and remained silent, watching from the side when she was locked in a magic tower. It's amazing how it all turned out. It was all her mother's fault. Oscar wouldn't leave her alone. He told her to go to the magic tower right after she got to the academy. Oscar promised to get her there. But Lilith refused. She didn't like it there. She wanted to stay at home with her brothers in Cheshire. But for disobedience, she had to be sent to the battlefield to fight monsters. And there, even the little ones were not spared. She didn't want to leave her dad, but Oscar reminded her of something. Dad promised that she wouldn't fight. He was going to send her father to war, but he did not listen to him. Now his daughter was the lever of pressure on the Duke. Father was against military invasion. Oscar was right. The Emperor could intimidate her father. He would have no choice. She thought about it. There was nothing to object to. She needed to think about how to prevent this. As long as she was not in the top ranks required to undergo military service, she could resist. There was time to help her father. But Oscar's position was interesting, judging by his words. The Emperor didn't like what his intentions were either. When the rebels came to the palace, Oscar was next to the Emperor but did not help him, watching his death. It may have been before she showed up as the latest villain, killing others, but he stopped Cheshire from killing her. He was carrying out the order of Enoch Rubinstein, but Oscar stopped him, fought to the death for her. It is strange that with such an attitude he did not help his father, and he did not stand up to defend the Emperor either. He stroked her forehead with his finger and told her not to frown. There would be wrinkles. In his opinion, this sounded logical. She could not understand the behavior of the head of the magic tower at all. What happened to him after that dinner? He didn't understand at first, Lilith simply said, until she explained that his actions and thoughts were unpredictable. The man, hearing her, began to laugh. He had something to say. She wondered why he became so kind to her. It seemed like he was up to something. How right she was. The cheeks of the head of the magic tower began to turn pink. He said that he loved her. There was a glimmer of hope in my soul that it was a joke, even if it wasn't funny at all. She couldn't believe that he actually blushed, but the blush disappeared from his face, and he clarified that he loved geniuses. The man laughed, pleased with his joke, while Lilith caught her breath, calming down. She began to be indignant and scold the head of the magic tower for such jokes, because he could be misunderstood. He, having laughed his fill, pointed to the window and said that someone was fighting there. Lilith, seeing Cheshire fighting with one of the brothers, froze. Looking closely at the earring, she realized that it was Leon. It was worth understanding right away. She immediately ran out of the office, asking to step aside. Because a tragedy was unfolding there, Oscar was watching her closely. After several long seconds of thought, a smile appeared on her face. It was interesting to watch the girl. The difference in their ages was a mere trifle compared to what Oscar saw. Lilith was mature beyond her years. She played well, and Oscar knew something. Screams began to be heard on the street, which belonged to Lilith. Leon was the first to see her. Leon immediately got off Cheshire, rising to his feet. The second one remained on the ground. The girl ran up to her friend, asking if everything was okay. It seemed like there would be a scar left. She had promised that she would not let anyone hit him, but now he sat there beaten. Lilith didn't know the whole situation. What happened upset her very much. Leon didn't even answer her questions. He just said not to be friends with the guy. Her brother sincerely considered him bad, but she didn't understand what had happened. I couldn't believe that all this was because he was a commoner. One episode kept spinning in my head. Leon doted on Cheshure, and although he was a real thorn in his side, he was ready to take revenge on anyone who offended him. At some point, everything went wrong. It seems the reason was in her. She just had to figure it out. She felt like she had saved him too early, but something was wrong. She was overcome with disappointment. She was also a simple person. She lived there. Wouldn't he have been friends with her if it weren't for her father? She had friends from the people, she lived next to them. They fed her, she even missed them. But it was not clear whether everything was as Lilith thought, but Leon could not say a word. She stood in front of Cheshure, shielding him from his brother's hands. She couldn't hurt him. Cheshure was her friend. The blonde's azure eyes sparkled with tears. There was nothing to say, a lump appeared in his throat. Was she really closer to this boy than to him, and he was her brother? Leon was just a child. Now it was clear why he behaved like that. Leon left silently, hearing that he was called evil, and yet he defended her. His heart ached painfully. The Cheshire Cat stood up as soon as the blonde left. There were no serious abrasions, only his lip was split. She lowered her head guiltily, apologizing for what had happened, having promised that it would never happen again. But Cheshure, surprisingly, sided with Leon. She may have misheard when he called him right. The Cheshire Cat decided that the guy had simply misunderstood him, so he attacked him. And this is how it happened. Leon approached him and asked if he and Lilith were friends, and the guy said no. The Cheshire Cat decided to say that he was a toy for the princess. That's what he thought in his heart. He thought that if he said otherwise, the guy would hate him. The guy also saw Leon's behavior. Most likely, Leon simply misunderstood Cheshure, which is why he got angry. Apparently, Leon decided that Lilith was a toy for the guy. That's why he got turned on. But she had offended her brother so much. Even though he had defended her, now she felt guilty. The guy felt sorry because he had caused a quarrel between his brother and sister, but Lilith did not blame her friend. Actually, it all started in the restaurant where they stopped to eat, taking Cheshure from the mansion. Cheshure decided that he should take care of her, although everything was not so at all, and Lilith decided to somehow distract the guy. She thought it would make him feel better for a while if she called him her toy. She didn't mean it that way at all, and didn't expect him to take her words so literally. She asked Cheshure to consider her his friend, because he considered him his friend. She seemed to touch Cheshure, you could see it on his face. She beamed with joy, seeing that the boy began to open up to him. The dark-haired man agreed, and Lilith demanded a promise from him that he would not go back on his words. Cheshure nodded, thinking about the girl, but she had already run away. And Lilith was already standing in front of the door to her brother's chambers. Leon was furious. She knocked, opening the door. Leon and his aunt were in the room. The aunt immediately decided to go get a drink after all. The guys needed to talk. He immediately frowned and turned away. It was time to use his childish privileges. Cheshure told her everything. She decided to ask what exactly made the guy so angry. He was right. Leon misunderstood him. That's why he got angry. She began to explain that he had misunderstood everything. Lilith herself had called him a toy. She joked. She understood that the joke was unsuccessful, but the guy himself was afraid to tell the truth. He was afraid that he would hate him, but it turned out that her brother was the same as she thought. Leon didn't hate him, he just smelled weird, that's all. She was closer to the boy than to her own brother, in Leon's opinion, of course. She brought home a boy she liked, he was sure of it, and Lilith thought it was all about origin, but no, Leon was just jealous. But Cheshure was her friend, and Leon was her family. All her life she thought that she only had a father, and then she had brothers, an aunt, and now a friend. But even having 100 friends, she would never forget her beloved brother. She really enjoyed spending time with her brothers, especially catching spiders. The blonde was part of her family. He was very important to her. He grabbed her by her small cheeks, asking if he was really so dear to her, and she did not lie to him. They sat hugging. Leon was glad that his good name had been cleared, and Lilith was glad that she had been forgiven. The most important thing is that Leon did not hate Cheshure, yet he apologized to the boy the next day. The dark-haired man couldn't believe what he heard. While the blonde himself was saying something, Cheshure was comparing her and Lilith. Even in appearance, they didn't have a drop of similarity, let alone their character. He immediately explained that he had apologized of his own free will, sincerely, and now he was waiting to be forgiven. Somehow he didn't want to drag out this scene, so Cheshure just nodded in agreement. Theo laughed. He knew that his brother was not bad at all. He just did not know how to express his thoughts and feelings. He finally introduced himself to the guy he hadn't had the opportunity to do so before. But Leon did not miss the opportunity to tell about what Lilith had told him he had to brag. Cheshure didn't really understand what was being said, of course, but he listened attentively. He said that Lilith loved him more than Cheshure, although he didn't particularly impress Cheshure. It was a little awkward, but he didn't expect any other attitude. He generally thought that he would soon be shown the door. True, he also told about Theo, and Theo, although sick, almost jumped out of bed, not believing what he heard. Yes, the blonde was clearly on top of things. He even lied that she loved him more than their uncle. While Leon considered himself number one, Cheshure tried to understand what it affected. It was like a division by rank. Theo immediately began asking who she chose between Cheshure and him, but he did not know the answer. He assumed that he would be the third. After all, the boys were her brothers. He was not going to stand between members of one family. But Theo, deciding to end this argument, got out of bed, clutching his aching head. It was worth finding out where Lilith was now. Leon began to egg him on until Theo himself began to cough, doubled over in pain. Leon immediately realized that something was happening. It seemed like an attack was starting. Cheshure froze. Leon ran away with honor. Theo and Cheshure were left alone, and a scream began to echo throughout the room. The blonde grabbed his throat as if he was being torn apart by pain from the inside. It seemed that things were bad, because his eyes turned red. Tears began to flow. Theo was in pain. He fell to the floor, starting to scream in pain and clutching his throat as if he couldn't breathe. Hands began to scratch the neck, leaving bloody streaks. Now it became alarming. Something had to be done, but Cheshure had no idea if he could help, so he had to choose. He still decided to help, grabbing his hands so that he couldn't hurt himself. There was less than a month left until the baby's birthday, and Enoch was still thinking about a gift for his daughter. He asked directly what exactly his princess wanted for her birthday, but she did not share his joy and was in deep thought. It seemed that what she needed did not exist at all. She could not understand what to do. She asked her father to take her to the festival. She needed to take her dad there. This festival was held in honor of Children's Day. Children from famous families read poems and rode horses. True, this was how the aristocratic festival was held, but Lilith clearly had in mind a simple festival. A festival where all the stalls were filled with toys and clowns performed. Enoch picked up his daughter, and she, realizing that she had no chance, only asked him not to tell her grandfather. True, the father himself was for it, but the girls saw one problem: they couldn't appear on the street like that. But they lived peacefully for 7 years before that. Could Lilith really have forgotten that time so quickly? He promised that they would sneak in and have a delicious meal, and then he would buy her any shoes she wanted. She kissed her father on the cheek, glad that he was able to arrange everything. The happiness did not last long until they approached Theo's chambers, from where screams began to be heard. She immediately began to try to get out of her father's arms in order to run to her brother. As soon as he let her go, the girl immediately rushed to Theo's chambers. Enoch noticed something strange in the girl's hands, but he couldn't figure out where she got it from. It seemed to be dark magic, but how it got to the child was unclear. It was worth following the girl and seeing what was going on. Theo twitched on the bed as the servants held him down, preventing him from harming himself, and the room was filled with noise. The aunt sat opposite and prayed that her son would feel better. Leon did not dare to raise his eyes to his brother. We had to hurry. There was little time. Lilith jumped towards her brother, hugging him and handing him the pendant with dark magic. Everything had to stop. The guy immediately grabbed the girl with his hands, and the pain began to subside. After just a few moments, the attack stopped. Theo stopped screaming, regaining consciousness. The servants immediately began to ask about the condition of the prince, who recovered surprisingly quickly. And then his mother, who watched his suffering in tears, approached him with questions. Even Leon was surprised, though pleasantly pleased, that his brother was feeling better. Today the attack ended too quickly, which was a relief to everyone in the Rubenstein house. But something still bothered her. No one saw the stone that she placed in her brother's hands. Everyone was happy, but weren't they interested in why everything stopped so abruptly, where their inquisitive minds and attentiveness were? Only she wasn't quite right. Someone actually noticed the stone. Enoch approached his nephew, asking what hurt and how he felt, but the boy was fine. This was undoubtedly pleasing, but also alarming, so it was decided to ask the sister how long the boy's attacks usually lasted. The attack this time lasted about 10 minutes, although previously it lasted about 3 or even 4 hours. The main character was very observant. Now all that was left was to watch from the side and play his role. She squeezed her brother's hand with dark magic in it, saying something that a small child her age might say. Enoch was worried that his daughter might be scared until he was distracted by the dark magic in the hands of children. He immediately asked where his daughter got it from, but she honestly answered that Theo bought it for her because the thing sparkled beautifully. Theo, of course, immediately opened his mouth, not knowing how to justify himself, and a sly smile settled on the girl's face. The thing was very expensive. Lilith immediately ran to her aunt, saying that it was very expensive, but her brother bought it for her because she herself persuaded him. Enoch assumed that the attack ended precisely because of this necklace. It was a concentration of magic. It was pure dark magic. The clash of mana was made easier by the increase in the level of magical power in the body. At this point in time, the priest could only advise wearing a necklace to prevent attacks. The collision of energy occurred based on the balance between the divine and magical forces of the body, if they were in equal proportions. Theo examined the dark magic in his hands while listening to the priest her mother and uncle had invited. The clash stopped because the dark magic increased the level of magical power. So many years of suffering for little Theo finally ended. At the moment, this was the only medicine that could help get rid of the attacks. It was hard to listen to. Sooner or later, the usual balance of power could return. But until a cure was found, Theo should wear the necklace with him. The brother and sister thanked the priest, wiping away their tears. They felt better. The priest also thanked them for the medicine they had accidentally found. But the priest was interested in how the Duke himself knew that the monster's heart could help in curing this disease, if he knew. True, Enoch himself did not know. Until that day, remembering Lilith's behavior, he tried to believe that it was just a coincidence. He said that no one knew. It was just that the daughter who wore the pendant like a toy came to her brother and he felt better. It seemed that it was God's will. The priest believed that God himself heard the lady's prayer, but Enoch believed that it was all about Lilith. Cheshure was also worried about Theo, although he didn't show it, and he had no one to show his worries to. He didn't know what exactly the blonde was sick with. He didn't know how serious the illness was, but he was worried. Although who was he to worry about the prince, the nephew of one of the most influential people in the country? True, Lilith and Leon with his mother caught him leaving. He gathered almost everyone. He was a lucky guy. Theo was resting, so it wasn't worth visiting him yet. The guy nodded, understanding everything. It was worth coming another time. He caught the lady's curious glance, but he didn't know who it was. He thought it was the girl's mother at first, but then he realized he was wrong. She was told that the boy helped her son until the servants arrived, and there was a grateful smile on the woman's face. She stroked his cheek. Cheshure's reaction made her laugh. The child turned out to be sweet and kind, which could not but please. True, the aunt noticed abrasions and wounds on the child's face. It was worth correcting this, even if he himself was against it. Enoch's sister immediately called the servants to help the boy and treat the wounds. And Cheshure stood there and couldn't understand these people. He didn't understand that such things could happen. He didn't understand why they were kind to him. Lilith demanded applesauce and that her aunt go with them. He didn't understand why they treated him with the same warmth as their children. Although he was their equal, why she wanted Cheshure to go with them. But Leon got jealous not again. But again they forgot to mention him. How familiar it is. The aunt smiled warmly at the children. It was nice to see that they valued each other and cared about their relationship. The weather was supposed to be beautiful this evening, so she suggested serving dinner on the veranda. The princess was happy, but the Cheshire cat just looked at her, observed. He generally tried not to get attached. He was still waiting for them to throw him out. The girl smiled warmly at him, noticing that he was looking at her. He was important to her. And Cheshure froze, looking at Lilith. His cheeks even turned pink. Something was brewing, something was clearly brewing. The girl grabbed the boys by the hands and dragged them to the veranda. A delicious dinner awaited them in the company of their family. 4 days have passed since Cheshure stared at Lilith. Everything was quiet and calm in the castle, especially thanks to the fact that a cure for Theo's illness had been found. Uncle Antrace, the brother's father, could finally return home to his family, leaving the search behind. Lilith was pleased with herself. Everything was going as it should. Theo, with whom the girl was lying on the grass, resting, began a conversation about the girl's birthday. She knew she had everything, and right now the best thing was that Theo was finally healthy. Leon soon found them, dissatisfied that no one had taken him. It seems that someone was quite the owner. He went to them to ask where Cheshure was, but he needed a reason to come. Only at that very moment Cheshure was walking towards them after training with Enoch Rubinstein. He drank water from the bottle Lilith had given him. It was just in time. While Lilith studied with the head of the magic tower, Oscar Manuel, Cheshure was trained by her father to wield a sword. Cheshure was supposed to become a sword master 2 years earlier than in the original, all thanks to her. She ran towards him, whispering to him about what they had planned, or rather, what she had planned for him. But the guy still didn't understand why the girl couldn't just go with the Duke, even though he promised to keep her company. And the jealous man, whose name is already familiar to everyone, began to scold them because they whisper and do not tell others. The dark-haired man still had no idea what he was doing now next to the Duke and his daughter. They marched in formation behind the man who had transformed into a commoner, but for some reason had not changed the appearance of his daughter. The streets were decorated for Children's Day, there was a festival going on, and the people on the streets were happy. Cheshure looked at the children with their parents, at the city lights. The capital was beautiful. Lilith saw in his eyes that the guy liked it here, just like in the original. In the original, the Duke went here with Cheshure, imagine. Without her, how is that possible? Although no, everything is so. She was stolen. What a twist. The romance between Enoch and Cheshure did not develop into a warm relationship. The Duke became cold to everyone after losing his daughter. But Lilith remembered that her dad still took Cheshure to the festival. He took care of the child, tried to become a father to him. Lilith was distracted from eating her caramel strawberries by a voice. Turning her head, she saw a tall, broad-shouldered, handsome as a god, seriously guys, man with eyes the color of amethyst. Although she didn't recognize Axion right away, it seems that he came to the village for them. The author has no idea. Remember for yourself. It seemed like they were communicating so coldly, but something still mattered. The girl felt it. Enoch looked like a commoner, and therefore Axion's mongrels did not show him due respect, and were even indignant that he addressed the master informally. The owner of the amethyst eyes immediately shut up his mongrels, his gaze involuntarily turning to the little girl. She immediately waved her hand at him and said hello, smiling and sparkling with her big eyes. Axion's return gaze was appraising, but the emotions were hard to discern. His face seemed carved from stone. The captain simply said that the man was his friend, then shutting up his charges. Having exchanged pleasantries, the men moved on to a more constructive dialogue it was worth talking about. You should have seen Brown's face when the aristocrat said he would personally investigate the case while at the festival. Recently, there have been more and more cases of children of commoners going missing, but almost no one has dealt with this. Crimes were investigated if the nobility suffered. Even the death or kidnapping of a common person was not investigated without at least 100 statements. Axion was clearly cool, even looked stunning, and used his power to help commoners. He was noble. It was not for nothing that such a man was a close advisor and assistant to her father. Axion said that he should watch himself and come back soon, but Lilith stopped him. She thrust the candy into his hand, then clenched the large palm into a fist with her small hands. It was a mint candy. She told him to eat it. She promised it would give him strength. Lilith, her father, and Cheshure went on. They had plenty of time to walk. The host announced from the stage that the competition was about to begin, the conditions for its implementation, and the prizes. The prize for winning was Princess Lara's shoes, an item from the fairy tale of the same name, The Adventures of Princess Lara. Oda, she liked them. She had to participate. Everyone must definitely envy her. The second prize was some kind of bunny pajamas. Of course, I didn't want to make Dad strain himself, but Dad had a different opinion. He knew that his daughter loved this fairy tale. He knew that deep down she wanted the slippers for herself, so he had to win. And of course, they went to apply for participation. Even if Lilith refused, in the worst case, he would just buy them. The host asked what the father's name was. I think it was the last contestant named James Brown. There was one small catch, the event called Daddy, and I was supposed to involve fathers with all their children. He didn't hint at it. He said directly that it was about Cheshure, and even pointed at him as if to say, this one should also take part. According to the rules of the competition, all children who were brought to the event took part. We were talking about strong mothers, so there was physical activity, but it was unfair for a father to raise 2 children at once. Cheshure thought so too, and in general he didn't really want to show off, although no one asked him. Enoch was ready to do anything for his daughter so he could easily raise 2. He was a duke. the second most powerful in the country. You should have seen Lilith's face when the sun was blocked from her view. Before her eyes there was a healthy man with a child in his arms. A surprisingly kind face with a light stubble smiled welcomingly, extending a hand for a handshake. The red-haired man had a great build. It seemed like one blow from such a fist could lead to death. Everyone participated, even mothers. The first test was push-ups. The host said that the test would continue until there were 5 teams left. Billy with his daughter and Enoch with the children stood nearby. Both of them seemed to have plenty of stamina. Lilith supported her dad with all her might. He was definitely going to win. There were 5 teams left, which meant the next competition was starting, before which they had to spin around several times. Cheshure couldn't understand Lilith at all. They were rich people and she was so clinging to those shoes. Why did they even give in to her? She could have bought them. But no, now it was a matter of honor. There was no turning back. What a strange child. Lilith had nothing to say. He only sighed resignedly. The Children's Day Festival was a great place to kidnap children. No commoners were wanted. No one would interfere. Over the course of a month, more than 20 children disappeared who had almost no resemblance, except that they were all commoners, and Axion had a composite sketch in his hands. To catch the criminal, he took 2 assistants, but they turned out to be absolutely hopeless. When asked about the capture, they simply looked away and said that they had not seen anything. It was disappointing, but what weighed on him more was the fact that he couldn't do anything about them. They simply took bribes and turned a blind eye, because the children were sold to the nobility. Alas, all he could do was simply threaten them. They, frightened, immediately ran to look for the person who was depicted in the photo fit, or pretended to look. He was still unconsciously clutching the candy in his fist, which he had remembered after letting go of the 2 slobs. The image of little Lilith immediately came to mind, telling him to eat her so that the will of the child would be law. Truth comes from the mouths of babes, and they also say that he really was able to perk up a little. The minty sweetness turned out to be delicious. Walking through the streets, he remembered the girl's face. She was like a doll, but still so similar to her father. He thought that if a man had taken Lilith hostage, he would have been dead long ago. Luckily for everyone, Lilith was now participating in the competition with her father and Cheshure. Axion felt the approach of old age. He was already concerned with such topics. Maybe it was time to have a child for himself. 2 fathers reached the final, James himself and Billy, the same red-haired big guy, and there was one last round left. Cheshure stood in the crowd and clapped along with everyone else. Waiting for it to be over, he wasn't very fond of the public. In the final test, the children had to guess facts about their parent. Parents, in turn, had to understand from the answers which box their child was in. All the children inhaled helium, so it was difficult to identify their own by their voice, but James was confident that he would win. His daughter knew him. Billy was also sure about his child, whether it was his own, or maybe he was the very same child abductor. In the other boxes sat the children who had participated earlier, so the round began. The first question was announced. It was connected with Dad's favorite dish, of course. It was scrambled eggs with chicken pieces, covered with tomato sauce, just like his princess. Billy recognized his daughter from the first question and was about to open the box, but the presenter did not interfere. Only James stopped him, suggesting that he listen to the second question. It was a pity to part so easily. They had almost become comrades after going through so many trials. Billy laughed and agreed. Why not? He was confident of his victory anyway. It was decided to listen to the second question. The man turned out to be very generous, a great rarity, also appropriate for our times. James couldn't understand how his daughter could forget something like that, but he hoped that she would definitely try in the second round. Now the child had to guess what size his dad's feet were. He hoped that Lilith would definitely not make a mistake here, although he no longer had the same confidence as with the first question. James's face was very eloquent. His daughter didn't even know how this could be. They had gone to shoe stores together so many times, she must have remembered. Lilith was his smart girl. It was time to open the boxes. James finally admitted his defeat. Deep down, he was offended by his princess. Billy guessed right with the box. His little daughter was waiting for him there. He was genuinely happy for the man. In fact, he could have just bought these shoes for the princess, so he didn't feel much offense. Lilith was sitting in one of the remaining boxes. It was hard to guess by her voice. Enoch decided to open the boxes himself. Of course, force could have been used, but the Duke decided to play fair. He began to open the boxes one by one, looking to see which one contained Lilith. One by one, large children's eyes began to look at him, not recognizing him as their parent, but this happened a little later. At this time, Billy and her daughter were collecting the prize from the competition host. They definitely deserved it. Billy and James shook hands, thanking each other for the great competition, and Billy suggested meeting up for a beer sometime. All that was left was to find my child in one of the closed boxes. He didn't hear his daughter's voice, and for some reason he didn't dare say that it was all over and they could go out. The third box showed him a little girl with beautiful green eyes. The child, as soon as he was released, ran to his mother, laughing and shouting something to her. Next box, slight jitters. Also a girl, also beautiful, but with different eyes but not his daughter. The man froze. There was only one box left. Fear was beating in his chest. He did not dare to open the box. Cheshure ran straight to the last box. Now he clearly had more determination. Hope was dashed, as were the hearts of the Cheshure and Duke when they saw the boy. It was time to panic. The man immediately ran to the presenter. Something was fishy here, especially since it was about his child. But the presenter was watching the children the whole time. He should have seen everything. His daughter was definitely the most noticeable. Of course, thanks to her dad, she inherited her diamond-colored eyes from him. But let's get back to the point. The child was kidnapped. The disgruntled presenter pulled his hand out of the tight grip, leaving with a pompous face to do his business. If only he knew who was in front of him. Well, by the way, they didn't let him leave either. When it came to the safety of his daughter, Enoch knew no pity, mercy, or compassion. The presenter clearly knew something. He frantically started calling security. He was sweating. He was nervous, which meant he was hiding something. The security didn't help much either. His appearance had changed, but he was still the same ruthless Duke. It was time to show these rotten Inhumans their place. Oh, it's a pity the censorship doesn't allow foul language. Axion understood, and so did the Duke and Cheshure, that this was a kidnapping. Everyone knew what the attitude was towards commoners. Almost no ordinary mortal received the protection that the law prescribed. In the 7 years of his absence, nothing had changed. The country had rotted, but no one was going to do anything about it. The power of the Guardians of Order ceased to have any influence over time. 2 guards were the first to get what they deserved. Next was the presenter. They were all involved in this, the notorious insignificant creatures. Since no one was listening to James Brown, it was time for Enoch Rubinstein to step up. Now the blonde won't get away with it. It's unlikely that his disappearance will worry anyone, because no one cares about the existence of a commoner. Lilith, of course, wasn't worried, but she didn't think that she could be kidnapped like that, to be honest. It reminded her of something. They just put it in a bag and took it away somewhere. That's a very familiar story, don't you think? Or is it just the author who's worried about it? She was distracted from her thoughts by the voice of the one who had kidnapped her. One of those who had kidnapped her, to be more precise. The girl didn't even cry, which surprised him. Look at his face. A familiar character. Yes. Well, in general, Lilith knew that her father would save her, and therefore she was not very afraid. But for the sake of decency, of course, it was worth crying a little. The man knew that such people never returned home, but he did not know that she was not from the common people. Asking to let her go was stupid, but in such situations it was unlikely that anyone would say anything else, especially children. Yes, it was certainly not fun to listen, but she learned that they were planning to sell her to the houses of the aristocracy. The merchant's accomplice came and said that it was time for them to run away, otherwise they would be in trouble. According to the people, the Grand Master of the Order of the Holy Knights decided to personally arrest them because of the noise in the commoners' area. Duke Livre Axion. It's surprising that he decided to take up such matters. Usually the nobility were not interested in people like them. The man in the photo fit, if no one suddenly understood, it was him in Axion's drawing, said that it was necessary to urgently hand over the other child to Viscount Blyman. Of course, it was possible to bargain to get more money, but it was too late. They had already been exposed. They were supposed to be delivered by a ship, so their route lay straight to the port. Lilith realized that this was contraband. They had to be detained. Lilith was an incredibly beautiful child, like her father, of course, so it was decided to take her with them and simply sell her at an exorbitant price. Now it was time to start panicking. This quiet horror was slowly starting to accumulate in my eyes. It was necessary to stall for time, of course, to start asking to let her go, but we were taught not to negotiate with the captors, but she was not, so she was saved. Don't hit me with a slipper for spoilers, and don't negotiate with the invaders. Lilith has already made arguments in favor of her release. Saying that she was part of the aristocracy was stupid, because they would hardly believe it, and if they did, it would be even worse. They had already seen her face, and besides, ordinary people despise people like her the most, and they were almost facing the death penalty. A commoner who dared to touch the nobility would not be pardoned, no matter how much he begged for mercy. They knew that. All that was left was to threaten them that her dad was a very scary person, which, it should be noted, was true. Well, who would be scared by such words? Well, obviously not seasoned bandits and experienced human traffickers. The law is not scary for them. The men were already packing their things to head to the port. Now she understood that Dad might not make it in time. The ground disappeared from under their feet, the cage was lifted, and the traders finally began to leave their shelter. Lilith's voice and pleas no longer stopped the men. They were about to leave when a knock was heard. The fat man opened the door. It was a mistake. He was rude to the stranger. It was a fatal mistake. The Duke was sweating profusely by the time he ran here for his daughter, but he still looked gorgeous, even more gorgeous than you after an hour of getting ready. Lilith noticed Dad behind the fat man. She could panic with peace of mind. She started wailing, calling for her dad, and tears were already flowing from relief and from fear and from everything in the world. The sobs came like a bolt from the blue. The merchant realized that this was the same dad the girl was talking about, only there was no fear. The fat man wasn't very scared either. It was a mistake, and he was also making fun of the Duke. It was a fatal mistake. Yes, I said it again. So what? The big guy immediately took out a sharpened blade, pointing it at the man's neck. They were also pressed for time. But Enoch immediately grabbed his hand and twisted it behind his back, putting him on his knees. All that was left was to put him to sleep. Now it was time to move on to the second one, who had a cage in his hands. The steps were slow and heavy. The air around became heavier. Even Lilith felt the weight, but the red-haired merchant grabbed his knives, preparing to fight. It seemed that he was not a coward, but it turned out that he was a show-off. But we know what's what. After all, the Duke is one of the most powerful people in the Empire. But even the life of a thief with a knife in his hands did not help him deal with his opponent. Wow, we did not expect that. He fell, groaning in pain. His wrists were broken. Apparently it hurt, a lot. He couldn't even understand what happened. It all happened so quickly. My head hit the floor with force and everything started to swim before my eyes. Now Dad looked truly frightening. Even Lilith stopped crying and watched, fascinated. The final blow, fatal. The opponent is defeated, the Duke is victorious, the fight is over. There was a lock on the cage to prevent the child from escaping, a precaution. Lilith called out to her dad, bringing him to his senses. Enoch was a real killing machine. Enoch used force to break the lock. He wanted to quickly take his daughter, hug her tightly, and hide her from the whole world. He opened the cage doors, letting the child out. Lilith, sniffling, immediately ran into her dad's arms, finally calming down. So small, like a tiny lump, the man hugged his daughter tightly. Now he too was calm. This day exhausted the girl terribly. She was very tired. Now it was clear why they didn't win the competition, and he already wanted to be offended. Well, not seriously, of course. The girl in his arms gradually calmed down. Enoch, having turned into James Brown, left the building with the child. Axion and Cheshure were waiting for him at the entrance. The man was surprised because they arrived just in time. An episode flashed through his head where Cheshure, having heard about the place where the thieves were, immediately ran away somewhere. Enoch didn't even have time to stop him. The boy ran for help. He turned out to be very diligent and brave, although a little reckless because he could have been kidnapped too. Enoch was worried about him. He had become quite attached to the child, and Cheshure even blushed at the Duke's words. They never worried about him. He just apologized for not being able to help, although he helped a lot. Enoch said that his children were something. Cheshure didn't even listen to the end. He was just called their child. The Duke treated him like his child. Axion said that those two were part of some organization that sold children to the nobility. There were not two of them, but many more. They were grabbed by some man, and James was surprised when that man turned out to be Billy. He was surprised that he had not returned home yet, but he said that he had heard a noise, so he decided to go back. He was told that these devils could withstand even if they were beaten non-stop for more than 10 days and nights. But Billy performed a miracle. Yes, the big guy was a walking mass of muscle, a real miracle. He asked the Duke how the princess was feeling. She was sleeping soundly. Her red eyes indicated that she had been crying. Could it be that all these children, whom Enoch saw during the day, running happily through the streets, would never be able to walk calmly without fear? This thought did not leave him alone, forcing him to think about the security system in this empire. Billy smiled warmly, taking out a small box from somewhere. Out of the box appeared the very same shoes that he had received for winning that unfortunate competition. James smiled, thanking Billy for the gift, and for his help too. He sat on the throne, red as a lobster, from the fact that someone dared to touch her, his palm clenched into a fist. The Duke's daughter was a real collar for her father, which took more than 7 years to create. Axion Livre was supposed to punish criminals according to his authority, but the man immediately dismissed this idea. He was ordered to say that the imperial family would take care of this, and he planned to execute the criminals themselves. All that remains is to find the aristocrats involved in this matter and punish them all immediately. It seemed that the aristocrats were not guilty, and therefore it would be strange to punish the nobility in the name of the imperial palace. It was time to start pulling on the leash. Enoch was principled and fair. It was worth respecting him. He needed to put a damper on things. As a ruler, he had to show how determined he was. The bright sun shone over the Rubenstein estate, illuminating all the lands of the ducal family. Lilith opened her big azure eyes, looking at the ceiling. It was difficult to understand where she was and who she was. What had happened? A few seconds later, she jumped out of bed, not understanding why it was morning. Had she really slept all day? The servants immediately ran to the young lady to ask her about everything, because she had clearly not been sleeping for the first day. They immediately began asking about her condition and well-being, but the girl immediately interrupted them, asking about her dad and Cheshure, who had gone to save her. But fortunately, nothing happened to them, and in her presence, Dad personally beat everyone up without getting hurt. The Duke had just left, and Cheshure hadn't slept a wink, sitting next to the princess's bed, not wanting to leave even to rest. Since even the servants knew about what happened, then grandfather should have too. But no, it turned out that Dad hadn't told him anything yet. Jetty calmed her down. No one even knew that the lady had secretly left the house with her dad yesterday. Even Jetty and June learned not from the palace, but from the owner, if he could be called that. They talked about Rico. It was forbidden to speak about him out loud. Even the walls had ears, as the Narnian said. As it turned out, Rico was worried that the princess might disappear while going out for a walk, since cases of missing children had become more frequent. It was still not clear, because she only told them that she would be going out somewhere. It turned out that the members of the Red Hawk had to report every step of everyone who belonged to the ducal house. The Duke went with the children, but Rico still assigned about 10 men to secretly follow the princess. Of course, no one belittled the Duke's capabilities and strengths, but anything could have happened. The Red Hawk people were surprisingly invisible. Their colleagues were professionals, experienced and trained. On the other side of the scale was a sword master who could definitely notice surveillance. But June fully believed that the Duke could not have noticed any surveillance, no matter how experienced he was. Yesterday, one of Rico's men literally shook the Duke's hand and said, "Hello, it seems," more than once. "Did you understand who we were talking about?" No. It was Uncle Billy. Forming an alliance with Rico was the most correct decision. Rico gave orders to always watch to help the lady. It was worth thanking Rico for such help and care. The cooperation was not only fruitful, but also gave a lot of benefits. However, there was something that they forgot about while talking. It was time for the young lady to get up. After all, she had already washed herself. Today was an important day. Today she had to be in her best outfit and be her most beautiful. Rico carefully read the letter that Lilith sent him along with the medicine, the first letter. First of all, she began to ask how the one he loved was feeling, whether the medicine was helping her, and then she decided to move on to her question. She was interested in Joseph Ruttman. She said that she would definitely come with something more and useful as payment for the help and assistance from the man. Joseph Ruttman was a political genius. He knew how to select talents, had a penetrating gaze, and had influence not only on the nobility, but also on the imperial family itself. Even those who had hardened themselves in politics for years could not compare with him. It was not clear how she wanted to find someone who had disappeared 2 years ago. He was distracted from his thoughts by Billy, who suddenly suggested they have a glass of beer. Rico praised his man, taking a sip of a chilled drink. Yesterday the guys tried hard, taught the scoundrels a lesson and helped the princess. It was interesting in whose favor Rico made the choice. It seemed in favor of the Duke. Rico himself didn't know yet, but at the same time he ordered to establish contact with the Duke of the Rubinstein house. Everyone knows why. But Billy himself was very impressed by the man. He turned out to be a very kind person, although he was the head of the ducal house. Billy's arguments seemed quite reasonable. The Duke's house was the most suitable. The Duke's return was a sign. Red Hawk was looking for a man who could start a revolution in the empire. He needed a man who had power but was not corrupted by it. The Rubinstein family was ideal. The ducal house had power second only to the imperial family, but remained honest, so it was surprising that the young lady was able to find them. Of course, the Duke was perfect for them. Billy's words inspired confidence. Enoch seemed like a good man to him. There was no greed in him. And yet, despite all the positive characteristics of the man, strength alone was not enough. After a 7-year absence, Enoch lost contact with the central nobility, and now he needed to understand the structure of power. Now he needed to get up in a short time. It seemed to be becoming clear why Lilith was looking for Joseph, especially now. Now more than ever, the Duke needed a talented strategist if he was to start a revolution. So who was the young lady who wanted to help the Duke? While Rico was pondering the princess's identity, she herself sat in front of the mirror and watched, alas, her hair being combed. Hours were spent dressing the princess and styling her hair, and the result amazed not only the servants, but Lilith herself. She touched the mirror, not believing her eyes. The real daughter of the Duke was looking at her from the mirror. Jetty and June looked at her with admiration and sighed with fatigue. After all, a lot of work had been done. She smiled. Her soft pink cheeks warmed in her palms. She was a real miracle. The girl was like a real doll, but still there was something that didn't suit her. She felt like she needed to touch up her makeup a little to look more beautiful. She told the girls about it. Princess Lara had red lips, but Jetty talked her out of it. After all, she was beautiful anyway. First of all, the makeup she wanted wouldn't suit her, and besides, it was too harmful for children's skin. The girls went to call young Master Theo. The young lady was already ready. He wanted to take her. And Lilith, smiling, waited until she was left alone. After all, she was the Duke's daughter or not, especially since there had to be a tea party. Ladies from the most famous aristocratic families of the central nobility and their children were invited. Everything was arranged so that Lilith could make new acquaintances with the children of aristocrats from other families. The novel did not describe such meetings, but it was reality, and she was the daughter of a duke and had to influence social circles. World peace was her daddy and Cheshure's business, and she had her own business to attend to, and she had to live up to her status, so a makeup brush would help. Something was clearly missing, but it was not clear what exactly, and therefore it was necessary to put on makeup. Still, if it weren't so, she could easily erase everything, which means there was nothing to worry about. In her past life, the girl was very busy and had no time for makeup, so she could only hope for a miracle. It seemed to turn out beautifully. She lined her eyes a little. It made her look a little more mature, but it was good, I think. Cheshure went first. Seeing the servants, he knocked politely, asking permission to enter. The guy entered the room, looking for Lilith with his eyes. The girl began to get down from the chair to turn to face him. Everyone recognized themselves here now. Yes, the author too. Everyone was shocked now. The author too, by the way, not only you and me. Cheshure simply froze, covering his mouth with his hand, and Theo and Leon appeared right after, because the two had been gone for a long time. It seemed that Leon's laughter could be heard throughout the palace. He was still embarrassed, especially in front of Cheshure, thanks to the maids who washed off his makeup. Cheshure modestly said that he thought Lilith was beautiful. Even her makeup wasn't that bad. By the way, Cheshure was not at all good at lying. He was honest, like Enoch, so it was easy to catch him in a lie. He always closed his eyes if he lied, like now, for example. But Leon began to laugh again, remembering the image of his made-up sister, and saying that she looked like an octopus witch. But Theo smiled at her once again warmly and caringly, saying that she was as beautiful as a princess. And then he switched to his brother, who didn't want to see anyone, but still came to the tea party, and Leon just wanted to look at the princess. He was told that she was very cute. Would he really like to look at Erica Ballerina on such a beautiful day? But Leon didn't have time to run away. The blonde saw the two of them. It seemed she came too quickly, so Theo could only mock his brother. Leon immediately grabbed Theo, demanding that he give him the earring, but Theo was against it. He also didn't really want to spend the day in the company of the ballerina. But Leon took his brother's earring without asking. Erica didn't see this, and so she ran to the one who had Leon's earring. As soon as the boys exchanged earrings, it was impossible to tell them apart, but only in appearance their characters were very different. Erica looked great. She was already 12. She seemed so grown up, as if she hadn't lived to be in her 20s in a past life. And Lilith herself was very little. She was only 5 years old. For some reason, she had no one to share her thoughts with except Cheshure, so she began to sigh to him about Erica. But Cheshure didn't really look at her. Somehow he didn't notice her beauty, if there was any at all. But the girl continued. She immediately began to remember the nickname Leon had given her, but Cheshure had never called her that. She was so looking forward to growing up quickly, to becoming beautiful like Erica. Only the ruby eyes weren't looking at Erica, they were looking at her. Even now she was beautiful, but Cheshure didn't dare say it. He only blushed and closed his eyes. Having torn herself away from false Leon, the ballerina immediately went to Lilith to exchange pleasantries. The ballerina immediately turned her gaze to Cheshure, thinking that he was Lilith's servant. She had not seen him before. But Theo, who became Leon for a short time, revealed that Cheshure was their friend, who was brought by Uncle Enoch. The girl was so surprised at how caring Leon was today, showing her everything, although he usually treated her rudely. Lilith had a hard time not laughing because Theo couldn't even be rude enough due to his kind nature, even though Leon kicked him so hard. As soon as he started talking like a real Leon, Erica immediately started throwing herself at his neck. She likes bad boys. While Theo was struggling with Erica instead of his brother, Lilith was getting to know other children of aristocrats. The boy was the first to start a conversation, but Leon interrupted him, having forgotten that he was in the role of Theo and was rude to him. Of course he didn't particularly like this guy. It was Damon from the Martini family of counts. He was the first to extend his hand to Lilith. The name was familiar to her, but she couldn't remember who it was until it dawned on her. Lilith remembered how in the novel this guy had hurt and offended Cheshure. This was the same upstart. He was the real villain #1. He always offended everyone, but you had to greet him too. He immediately made a sarcastic remark about how she lived among ordinary people, but still had some manners. But Leon could not restrain himself, saying that the guy had a big mouth. You should have seen Martini's face. What a strange name. It's not just me who thinks so. Yes, well, you should have seen his face when Theo, as he thought, said that. Of course, Theo was always a quiet boy. It wasn't like him, but Damon didn't stay away. He made a sarcastic retort to the guy. Damon got to the bottom of Cheshure. Just like in the original, what a coincidence. He started asking what kind of family the guy was from. Leon immediately stood up for him. Lilith didn't even have time to think, and he immediately said that he was from a simple family and threatened not to interfere with their friend. He thought that he was taken as a toy for a friend. The boy was lucky to get into high society like that. He advised him not to upset the Duke and not to disappoint him, and Cheshure only calmly agreed, although Lilith and Leon were already ready to beat him. Damon suggested that they have some tea together and get to know each other better. Erica dragged poor Theo off to have tea with them without even asking his opinion. It seemed like it was time for everyone else, too. Lilith held Cheshure's hand tightly as they walked together to have tea. She was lucky to have grabbed a handsome man. Everyone would like to have one like him. He was also smart. But Damon managed to screw everyone over even here, being surprised that the Duke's ward was also going with them. As he said, there were boundaries between the nobles and the commoners. He could not sit at the same table with them, although when their family dined, they all sat together. Leon just wanted to paint that arrogant face. He was too impudent. But the guys, both Leon and Lilith, were stopped by Cheshure. They shouldn't have ruined their relationship with someone because of him. He said he wanted to go to the training ground. It was time for him to go. They would definitely see each other later. Lilith wanted to stop him, but Leon didn't let her go. He understood everything from Cheshure's eyes. Now Lilith understood her brother. This Damon Martini was an incredibly annoying guy. The table was full of all sorts of dishes. No one ate. From the moment the dishes were brought, everyone just listened to Damon praising himself without ceasing. It seemed that they weren't even listening to him. But when he asked about the Antris brothers' participation in the races, they answered that they were planning to go hunting. Damon decided to be sarcastic. Again, he thought he was so cool, but he was simply ignored. Only Leon was sarcastic in response. He just got on his nerves. Two children, who appeared out of nowhere, began to praise Martini now instead of himself. It seems the young count's tongue is tired. I wonder who these children were. It came to Lilith. Another girl started asking whether the lady would participate in the races, but Lilith did not plan to. The upstart invited Lilith to watch the competition, although it was already clear that he would win. I wonder why he hadn't been kicked out of the table yet, as if he was the only one annoying Leon. Princess Ballerina finished off Lilith completely by saying that Theo was being terribly sweet today, behaving like Leon. It's a pity that swearing is prohibited. How she wanted to win this upstart, to wipe his nose, so that he, gritting his teeth in anger, would leave as a loser. She was definitely meant to be in the races. Lilith stood and looked at the horses in the stalls, not knowing what to say. The horses were very beautiful. Cheshure also wanted to take part in the competition. Fortunately, he could also take part, even take a prize place. All that's left is for Lilith and Cheshure to choose their horses for the race. Lilith knew for sure that the main character always wins and takes only first place. Of course, the boy had not yet ridden a horse, but he had the incentive to learn and win, as a token of gratitude to the Duke for his kindness. The competition was supposed to help her put Cheshure in his place and make him famous, to reveal his talent. While Cheshure was choosing his horse, Lilith was choosing her own horse, although she needed something for her level of abilities. Among all the horses, my gaze fell on one mare the color of a white cloud. It seems that yes, this was definitely the horse that Lilith would have liked to compete with. She immediately told her dad that she wanted to participate with her, but they were stopped by the groom, who realized what they needed the horse for. The man warned that the horse named Zephyr was not fit to race, even though he had won last year with Count Martini. The horse, which had an owner, was here now, got injured during training, and even after recovery could not participate. They just abandoned the marshmallow that brought victory, that won the competition. They just left it. As a racehorse, after her injury, she had no sales value and would have been simply scrapped. Most often they are sent to the slaughterhouse. You should have seen Lilith's face. For her, the horse was healthy. Enoch tried to reason with his daughter. Such a horse was causing losses, but the girl was so small. How could he explain anything to her? Lilith grabbed her dad's pant leg and started whining, asking her dad to take Zephyr for her, not just for the competition. And how could a father refuse his beloved little daughter? Of course, he couldn't. True, there was another nuance that would hardly have allowed them to take the horse, since it was not only a matter of injury. The horse would not be given into anyone's hands, being too attached to its previous owner, who had so cruelly abandoned it. For Lilith, this horse was dangerous. The groom suggested that they look at another, more suitable horse. Enoch considered the man's words reasonable. But could reason win over selfless parental love? No, of course not. That's why Lilith put pressure on her father's feelings. Lilith asked to use fall protection magic. She really didn't want this horse to die. Lilith was a real angel in the eyes of her dad, and Dad was partly right. She sincerely did not want the horse to die. Training soon began. First of all, Enoch taught Cheshure to sit in the saddle. The boy grasped everything on the fly. Lilith watched and supported the guy while the Duke went with him to make a circle. She was bored. She looked at the stall where her horse was. It didn't let her near it. It didn't let anyone near it. She was too wary, too aggressive, didn't trust anyone. Even bringing her was a real test. But she still tried to calm her down. The competition was not very important to her. Zephyr just turned away, as if he understood her, heard every word, but did not believe it. All that was left was to hope that they would believe her. It seemed that Zephyr missed her owner. The attachment was strong, and therefore she did not perceive anyone. Since the horse wouldn't let anyone in except the nasty Damon, there was nothing left to do but win Zephyr's trust. From the next day, Lilith personally began to come to the horse and feed it, bringing it baskets of carrots. I have never seen horses fed carrots, maybe that's why she always refused. In general, the situation did not get better from day to day. The horse did not make contact. All that was left was to continue waiting. Zephyr and Cheshure's horse were standing in their stalls, waiting for the next day of training, just as Cheshure's horse was waiting. Today she was late for the marshmallow because the head of the magic tower, you haven't forgotten about him, dragged out the lesson too long. While Lilith was complaining to her horse about the trainer who demanded too much, Cheshure was training hard. His father was no longer standing nearby. Cheshure no longer needed help. Cheshure was a real fine fellow, yes, Lilith was clearly proud of him, and she was waiting for the defeat of the arrogant Damon Martini. She was distracted from her thoughts by her father who came up to her today. He was completely different. Today was the ceremony to honor Enoch's return to the Knights, so he looked so solemn today. The armor clearly suited Dad, and he sat down next to her to talk before leaving. It seemed that the marshmallow still didn't want to ride the princess, but Lilith still believed that he needed time to recover from his master's betrayal. The princess's reasoning was too adult, but still so childish and kind. All that was left was to support the princess, and the princess only had to support the Pope before leaving for the ceremony with the emperor. She decided to ask directly if it was true that her father did not listen when the emperor sent him to war, and said that she learned this from the Lord. This time the father had to go to save his little daughter from the terrible monsters, only she understood everything. But she wasn't talking about the kind of war that her father told her about. She talked about wars of conquest, when people took other people's homes, their lives. She hoped that her dad had not participated in such wars, although it was unlikely, although she did not want to put pressure on her dad. And he would be glad not to participate. Lilith asked him not to go to war, to tell the emperor about it. Such wars were bad. She didn't want her father to participate in them. She, noticing that Dad had frozen, began to call him by the name with which they lived in Xenon, and Dad became a little more cheerful. The princess fell into her father's arms, muttering something under her breath, her little palms clutching her father's cloak. Of course, he understood that his daughter was at stake. He would either sacrifice her or personally put the collar around his neck and give the leash to the emperor. Lilith didn't want her father to do anything bad because of her, especially against his will. The next day, Lilith started very early in the morning. Zephyr woke up with her. She had wanted to come here at dawn for a long time. The basket of carrots was heavy, but Lilith dragged it anyway, and then climbed into the horse's stall. She began to carefully approach the horse, saying that this was what was left over from what she had sent to Rico. The medicine should have helped him. She wanted to heal the horse's leg secretly, but decided that it would be much better to do it with her consent. The horse stood calmly, letting the child approach it. It seemed that it had begun to trust Lilith a little. Their family doctor, Flynn, said the medicine didn't work on animals, but she decided to try anyway. Rico said that the horse might not move because of pain in the leg, so it was worth fixing it. It was all Damon's fault, damn him. She wasn't doing it for the races anyway. That's why she didn't force Zephyr to train or run. She didn't chase after victory. How different she was from Zephyr's previous owner. Damon didn't give permission to rest. He just demanded first place. He demanded training around the clock. He demanded an unconditional victory. She was born to run. Damon always said so, but Lilith said otherwise. She thought that racehorse was a very strange expression. Was a horse born just to run? Of course not. And Damon simply replaced the marshmallow with another horse. There was no hope for it anymore. But Lilith said that she would be valued not only for victories. It was not scary not to win. She just wanted the horse to get better soon, her heart, her leg, and so they fell asleep together in the field. They were found by their grandfather, who accidentally entered the stable. His voice became clearer. Lilith began to wake up. An image of her grandfather appeared before her eyes, telling Lilith to get up quickly. It seemed that she now looked a little inappropriate. Grandfather did not like that. It was worth getting out as soon as possible and going to tidy herself up. She immediately began to apologize for her appearance, but he only interrupted her, asking what kind of horse was in the stable with her. The man heard that the horse did not even let Lilith mount it, but she still took care of it. Grandfather immediately offered to change the horse, but it immediately refused. It was impossible to throw the marshmallow, especially now. She was afraid that the horse would close itself off from everyone if she gave it up now. It seemed that she could not take part in the competition and win a prize for the family. But her grandfather didn't tell her to participate in competitions and bring home awards. However, since there was a competition at stake, she should have ridden a horse at least once. The man knelt down, putting his cane aside. He had to figure out what kind of shoes the girl was wearing now. His horse was waiting for him in the stall, a beautiful, stately steed. The man began to put the saddle and reins on her, and then he put Lilith in the saddle so that he could sit down himself and give the child a ride. The horse began to trot, and the man pulled on the reins to make the horse run faster. Lilith snuggled in surprise. It was just wonderful. The lands of the ducal family and their very walk. It seemed that from the hill where her grandfather brought her, the entire village and all their possessions could be seen. But it seems that grandfather was supposed to return only the next day together with Dad tomorrow. Could it be that Dad also returned earlier than expected? Grandfather jokingly said that he had to put up with his annoying son at home, so he decided to come back early and take a break from him. She saw that her grandfather was happy. This made her happy and calmed her down. It seemed that he was not angry with her. It was clear that the father was glad to see his son back. He missed him, and she was glad, although he denied everything, saying that without this headache it was calmer at home. Dad always said while they were in Xenon that he missed Grandpa. She was sorry that she was the reason for their separation. It was funny that it was Enoch who caused all this chaos, but Lilith apologized so persistently to her grandfather because she was so ashamed. Now he had to go to war again because of her, fight a bad war, although she knew he didn't want it. Grandfather saw how much pain there was in the words of this child, although she asked him to convince her father not to go anywhere, but to let her go instead of him. Due to her childhood, she did not yet understand that not everything in life goes the way people would like. Lilith's father never hesitated when it came to losses or sacrifices. As a child, he tried to go to the emperor with a demand to abolish the class system. His grandfather persuaded him with difficulty. In the end, Enoch submitted, learned to restrain his temper, learned to control himself because of his father, because he considered it his duty not to go against the will of his parents. This time it couldn't be any other way. He would have to sacrifice his beliefs again for the sake of his father, for the sake of his daughter, for the sake of his family. Enoch had lived his whole life holding himself back. Now he was ready to go against his principles for the sake of his daughter's happiness. The man ruffled his granddaughter's hair. He felt sorry that Lilith had to live in such a world, but the whole family could not accept the fact that the little girl was going to risk her life every day. Lilith's father would definitely not have tolerated this, but one could only hope that one day the world would change, and the endless wars would end. Yes, the man's look perfectly reflects all his surprise. We will not comment. The girl, a beautiful golden-haired beauty with eyes almost the same as his, looked straight at the Duke, saying nothing. The day of Enoch's return and reinstatement was a very solemn and pompous one, but there was no great joy. He presented himself to the emperor according to protocol, as befits a servant of the great example, the son of the pavilion. Faithful servant, great sword of the empire, yes, Primera was sincerely glad of the man's return. Enoch had to devote himself entirely to the empire. Returning after long wanderings, this was beneficial to the emperor. The emerald-colored eyes sparkled contentedly. He hoped that the servant would take up the holy knight's sword again. Everything was according to the will of the great example. He had no choice. He mentioned the knight's daughter, saying that the man could have taken her with him. He was looking forward to meeting this child today. Sadness settled in the man's soul. Everything was red in his eyes. All he could do was purse his lips. He knew that the girl was strong and definitely had abilities. People without abilities could not be born into the Rubinstein family. Another talent was born in the empire who would shed blood for the good of his country. The man called the knight closer to him. He wanted to show him something. All that remained was to remove the curtain. What he saw impressed Enoch, not in a good way, and images immediately began to appear in his head, stirring up old wounds. He began to remember his comrades whom he had lost in battle, not in one battle. He remembered kneeling before his once living comrades, regretting that he had survived and they had not. On the walls hung portraits of many of his comrades who had died on the battlefield, giving their lives for the glory of the empire. He at least somehow honored the memory of the soldiers. It was not easy to send his servants to certain death, even if it was for the good of his country. The man was silent, looking at the portraits of people in whose eyes there was still life. The war was sheer chaos. But even so, the emperor was not going to stop because he wanted absolute power, hiding behind the danger from outside. There was a lump in my throat, and it was difficult to say anything to the emperor. It seemed that the emperor had said everything too. It's scary to blow it out. It will go out. It's dangerous to squeeze it tighter. It will break. That's exactly what the daughter was like for Enoch, for her father. He didn't understand what exactly he was getting at with this example, but he knew that it was already time to worry. He pressed on the sore spot, specifically reminding her that his daughter would one day have to go to war, that he could free her. But he knew that he was not the only driver. Others would have started the fight. No one wanted to send a child to war, but Enoch had the strength to protect his daughter. With his strength, no one could object if he decided to take her debt upon himself. They often disagreed on the war. It seemed that the conquest of the continent was pointless, but the emperor believed that everything was for the sake of the people, so that no one could disturb the empire. Enoch realized that Primera was preparing an invasion again. This time he made it clear that he expected a different answer. In 7 years, the empire has changed, and it seems he has too. He has changed so much with the appearance of his daughter. The choice was up to the man, either principles or the life and happiness of his daughter. Now he was not just a knight, he was a father. Winter was the best time for an invasion. Snowstorms, blizzards, and snowstorms would be able to hide the smell of blood and mountains of corpses under a layer of snow. All that was left to do was leave. But could they really let him go so easily? He was waiting for an answer. The answer was expected. The example was holding a leash in his hands. The collar was on the Duke. Axion, when Enoch came out, immediately asked what they were talking about, although he already knew. He knew from the tone how it all ended. Axion asked him to meet one person before leaving. Selena was waiting for him. A familiar character, found out who it was. If so, then well done. It was strange that she suddenly decided to meet, but Axion didn't know about it either. He assumed that she wanted to see her daughter. After all, he wasn't the only one who gave birth to her. After all, she had a new family for a long time, another child. It didn't really look like Selena, and yet he had to let her see her daughter if that was what she wanted. The girl waited near the hall where the Emperor received Enoch. Well, Axion left, leaving the former spouses alone. He had things to do, and here he was clearly superfluous. Selena smiled, asking how he was, as if there was no marriage, 7 years and a child between them. Enoch never changed. Not for anyone except his family. She was never his family. She decided to start by apologizing for telling His Majesty about him. But Enoch wasn't angry at all. He had long since resigned himself to it. He knew that he would have been found anyway. For her assistance to the Emperor, she was able to resign, and her son was exempted from military service. She didn't understand why he didn't run away. He would have definitely found a way. He knew a way, but his daughter wanted to go to the capital. As soon as he was asked about his daughter, he became a completely different person. Tenderness, love, and care began to splash in his eyes. Yes, there was nothing to say. This child did something amazing with the ruthless, strict, always gloomy and serious Enoch Rubinstein. This child performed nothing less than a miracle. But speaking of his daughter, once he got to the heart of their conversation, he thought that she wanted to see him. To his happiness or regret, she did not want to see her. She asked not to talk about her. True, she knew everything, but that's not the point. The girl had to enter the training center. They could have met by chance. It would have been awkward. Enoch could not condemn her. He understood her. And the woman thought about her son, about her family. It would have been hard for the child. She would not have become a mother to her. All that was left was to accept her choice. Maybe she was right about something. Her child was also in the training center. It could have a bad effect on her son if Lilith found out. He should have understood her. When children appeared, a person changed. The Duke knew this from his own experience. She was ready to do anything for her son, and he was ready to do anything for his daughter. She wished him luck as she left, and it seemed that this was the end of their relationship. He just looked after her. It was a little painful not for himself, but for his daughter. He was very tired that day. It seemed he should quickly return home and rest. The man lay on the bed, exhausted from the day, and it seemed as if there was some awkward silence between him and his daughter. It seemed so to him, but Lilith calmly read a book while her father was nearby. He was worried about how she would react to this, but it was worth talking about her mother. Suddenly, she wanted to see her. It seems he was dating my mother. He wouldn't have just asked about it. He had to get out of it. They were in the capital. It was strange that she never asked about it, but Lilith didn't even think about her. She asked if Dad wanted them to see each other, but she was not eager to see Mom. She didn't miss her. She didn't want to see her. It would be awkward if they saw each other. Her mother didn't have to be there. She didn't need her. She wasn't curious about where she was, how she was, why she didn't stay with her. She asked once because she used to think that everyone only had a dad, but others said that they also had a mom. The meeting was not obligatory. The father did not press. He was glad deep down that she did not want to see her. It was time for them to go to bed, and while the girl, with her eyes closed, was dreaming her 10th dream, Enoch watched his daughter. Yes, she was somewhat similar to Selena. The ceremony, judging by Dad's mood, went terribly. It was worth supporting him, with hugs, for example, and words about your feelings. She loved her dad very much, more than anyone else in the world. They didn't need a mom. They already had a big family. The next day began with a letter from Rico, not only informing her of the condition of his younger sister, but also that he had found Joseph Ruttman. He was in the training center. He lost his family 2 years ago. It seems he went crazy because of it, For the same reason he disappeared 2 years ago, often appeared in the gambling house of the county of Walterac. He was broke. He needed to prove himself in order to use the interest. Rico told her everything, despite the principle of a favor for a favor. He didn't forget. He decided to make an exception and pay the debt. This touched Lilith, terribly touched her. He advised Lilith to trust Jetty to convey information to the Duke, wished her luck in the horse riding competition, and congratulated her on her upcoming birthday. She asked Jetty to burn everything except the congratulations on the upcoming holiday. She still needed to write something for the Duke. Lilith thought the text was not supposed to be a simple narrative. She began to write an appeal, a call for revolution. Yes, she was determined. True, the servants thought it was a bit daring, but Lilith needed it. The letter was truly inspiring. The handwriting was impeccable thanks to Jetty's light hand, who imitated the handwriting beautifully. She was curious about who the young lady was, as if she were living a second life. Otherwise, it would be difficult to understand where such knowledge came from. The letter was also quite revolutionary and daring, but Jetty forgot something. Lilith decided to remind her, namely the first rule of the Red Hawk. Everyone understood, yes. And Jetty understood the princess's hint perfectly. She had nothing to provide in response, so she did not receive any answers. Everything was fair. The training ground was in full swing. Knights were fighting each other. Cheshure was learning to hold a sword. Enoch was watching the child to help if necessary. He looked at the knights thoughtfully, remembering Lilith. The daughter said that all she needed was her dad. Yes, he will never forget these words. It seemed that his efforts alone were not enough, that he could not make up for his mother's absence with his love. He was wrong, very wrong. He was distracted from his thoughts by Cheshure, who suddenly stopped. The guy was chewing something, or so it seemed. He thought he was feeling bad, and he was partly right, although he said the opposite. The man froze and then, realizing what was wrong, immediately ordered him to stop. But Cheshure didn't even listen. After all, it distracted him from training. Even Enoch Rubinstein, the great knight of the sword, was shocked and panicked by what the boy had just done. He just pulled out his own molar, mind you. That's nothing special. Or not a native. We haven't figured it out yet. It seems like a milk tooth after all. And then he began to wipe the blood from his mouth. He was surprised that he had been pulling his own teeth all this time. It was actually painful. Even Enoch got goosebumps, but he didn't see anything scary in it. He was so used to it, the brave boy. Enoch immediately began to look at his teeth and ask him about them, about what he had and how. At the age of 6, the first one fell out. Now only the back ones remain. All the rest were permanent. It was interesting. The boy was no slouch. He made him think about his daughter, too. 6 seemed too early, but his daughter was already 7 years old. Yes, it seems it was time for him to take charge of the life and health of his child. Yes, the teeth really should have fallen out by now, as they wrote in the book, as happened with Cheshure. Her child had not yet cut all of her baby teeth, but it was already time for them to fall out. But he couldn't figure out the reason, perhaps because she didn't eat enough when they lived in Xenon. Of course, he was exaggerating a little, but he was worried about the child, and it was understandable. There was a red mark on his forehead from the blow. Something had to be done. Could it really be the feeding? He was distracted from his thoughts by a servant who came and brought him documents for work. The man asked the servants not to scare him like that anymore. Rem knocked more than 10 times, but the master did not hear him. Rem began to scold the gentleman for being in the clouds. After all, he had raised him since childhood. It was worth guiding the man now. The child's care should have been entrusted to professional maids, and he needed to fulfill his duties. Rem took the books on raising children and told the master to sort out his affairs and then review the letters. It seemed that he had already gotten out of the habit of this work. It was necessary to get back into the groove. He wanted to spend time on Lilith. He was worried that something was wrong with her, and he had to work. It was terrible. In the box, among other things, he saw a letter with the seal of the one who told him about Cheshure. The letter spoke of a way to save his daughter. The letter had an extremely revolutionary tone, calling on him to remember the future that the Duke had dreamed of so much in his childhood. The country had to change. He had to do it. The stranger advised him to start by looking for Joseph Rootman. He had to know about him. Rootmana was in the lands of Valterac, in the central region, the first step of the Great Revolution. It was this man who could help the puzzled Enoch. The handwriting of the 2 letters was different. It was difficult to understand who was behind it. The person on the other side was hiding. It was not clear who it was, but the words about revolution were too dangerous. It was impossible to risk everything like that. They openly offered him a coup, even for the fact that he received this. Just for the fact that he read it, he could already lose his head. He was a real psycho. The revolution was not an easy thing, otherwise someone would have started it long ago. The emperor declared absolute power. This power was once given by the supreme god Primera. This power was only passed down to the imperial family. It would be difficult to resist the ability of a man whose power was comparable to that of a god. He understood that someone was watching him, but it was clear why they chose him. Young, fair, principled Enoch dreamed of cutting off the emperor's head with his own hands. Enoch knew about his abilities then. The emperor could subjugate people with abilities with his power, but the duke did not succumb to his control. But the dream remained a dream. At that time he did not know much, that for a revolution force alone was not enough, a convincing reason was needed. He had no reason, and without a reason he could not secure the support of the upper classes. Most of the nobles benefited most from the existence of the class system. They were satisfied with the rule of the emperor. The words of the man behind the letter were insane. It could have been a trap from the emperor. He didn't know how to react to that. If a man was so brave, he should have been braver and said it to the duke's face, but this was impossible for obvious reasons. Lilith sat and waited. All that was left was to wait and watch. The deed was done. Lilith followed Cheshure into the stables, wondering if Dad had read the letter and how Zephyr was doing. While Lilith was complaining, Cheshure was feeding his horse. He was somewhat attached to it, and therefore it seemed that he did not pay attention to the girl's suffering. She wanted to catch him, but he really listened to her worries about her uncle's life. What if he was left alone? He heard and listened and heard everything. Cheshure was an amazing child, and also terribly beautiful. Lilith was fine living without her mother, and her uncle could have decided everything himself. If someone had appeared, he would have married, but Lilith was still worried. When it came to her mother, she began to worry about her father in the original. There were no love lines. The plot was not romantic. While the heroes needed to continue living after the ending, to find happiness when peace reigns in the world. In a world that existed based on the bloody revolutionary novel, it seemed that the author did not give the characters of Cheshure and her father a drop of love. Whether Cheshure even had a chance to get married, she did not know. If the author didn't put it in them, then Lilith herself should have done it. It was necessary to start with Cheshure. Did he need a family? Did he even want to be with someone? Or was he better off alone? The dark-haired man decided that she would start telling him to become her father's son again, but this time he guessed wrong. She asked about his family, created by his will, his own family. But he had no idea what she was talking about. She was talking about love. Whether he could ever love someone, whether he would want to get married. Poor Cheshure couldn't understand what Lilith was talking about. This child decided to drive him crazy today. In part, he was even right. It all started with a simple close your eyes and imagine. He closed his eyes and began to listen to Lilith. The performance began in the morning. The house was filled with the smell of freshly cooked breakfast. His wife was calling him from the kitchen. She asked to take her son and, after changing his clothes, go down to the table with him in the nursery. A little son was waiting for him who looked like him and his wife. The father, that is Cheshure, gives his son a bottle, getting ready to take him to the kitchen, and the baby smiles happily. He starts rocking his son and playing with him, but then his wife comes up to him from behind and hugs him tenderly from behind. She opens her big azure eyes and suggests going on a picnic while the weather permits. The son, sitting in his father's arms, babbles something. The wife lays out fruits and snacks for the picnic. And then he suggests taking a little walk around to work up a little appetite. Lilith continues to babble about love, and Cheshure looks at her, listening to her confess her love. Yes, she didn't really understand the whole situation, but Cheshure understood it. He felt it, as if this girl was driving him crazy. That's how she told it all, and to be honest, he had nothing to answer. It sounded good? Actually, it sounded great, but he wasn't sure he could build a family. Did the author see her efforts and her attempts through tears, blood, and sweat to instill in Cheshure love, or at least some feelings other than justice? She simply told him, "Let's make love," and inside him the whole world turned upside down. He kept looking into her azure eyes. She went off to get some carrots, and he could still feel the warmth of her hands on his palms. His blush seemed to give him away. She wanted to explain to him that horse riding, fencing, and studying were important, but there was something else too. Love was one of the most important components. Those who did not know this were probably very unhappy. Of course, he had no choice but to agree. Lilith knew how to convince. She waved the carrot for a long time until the marshmallow bit her. You should have seen the children's faces. It seemed that Zephyr had finally begun to open up to them. She pulled out the carrot, starting to chew it and looking straight into Lilith's eyes, as it seemed to her. She immediately began to talk about this to Cheshure, as if he was not with her now and had not seen anything. He immediately decided to check something. He needed to take Lilith to the horse. He went to open the gate. The boy told her to pet the horse, and then went inside with her so that if anything happened to her, nothing would happen. Lilith carefully began to stretch her hands towards the horse. It did not kick, only its nostrils flared weakly. Zephyr let herself be touched, allowed herself to be stroked. It seems she was able to gain her trust. The child's happiness knew no bounds. Cheshure was already putting a saddle on the horse so that the princess could try riding. All that was left was to find something for Lilith to climb onto in order to sit in the saddle, since she was very small. He didn't see a chair or any kind of stand, so he got down on one knee to let her climb in. Oh, how romantic. He himself blushed a little, but still decided to hurry her so that she would have time. There was no time to think. Lilith held onto his shoulder, and he held onto her legs and arms so that she wouldn't fall anywhere. With difficulty, and with Cheshure's help, she finally climbed into the saddle, beginning to look down on everything. It was amazing. She had forgotten what it was like to be tall. Cheshure looked at the contented child with a smile, holding the reins in his hands. They could probably go for a walk. The boy told her, as the Duke had taught him, to sit firmly in the saddle, not to slouch, and to keep her back straight. She was afraid of falling, but Cheshure reassured her, saying that he was nearby if anything happened. He congratulated her. He was truly happy. He knew that it was hard for her. His ruby eyes sparkled, looking at the little princess. The horse riding competition took place the next day on the hill of Yart. Lilith stood next to Zephyr in a special suit and happily waited for Damon Martini. There were 7 participants in total, 2 of which were Lilith and Cheshure. Usually people did not come to the competition if the outcome was known. This time there weren't so many people. Lilith was calming her dad, who was worried about her, although she was almost glued to the saddle. They put a fall spell on her so she wouldn't get hurt, but her father was still a little nervous. Journalists wrote down everything. Every step could end up in the newspaper, so that no one would think or write something wrong about her father. She asked him to go. She rode him for the first time yesterday, trained for 5 hours. It wasn't enough, but at least it was something. Lilith asked her dad not to worry. She wasn't chasing victory. She just wanted to calmly ride with Zephyr. The father saw how dear this horse was to his daughter. Yes, Lilith couldn't take her eyes off her. She was beautiful. Cheshure with his black horse looked stunning. Yes, a true winner. Flawless. It was hard to take your eyes off him. Enoch thought that Cheshure was a real beauty, and Lilith almost had a stroke at the sight of the raven-haired man. Yes, the main character was simply ideal. All the others, even some of the main characters, were extras compared to him. He was worried about Lilith because she didn't pass the obstacle course training, but she didn't need it. She just came to ride with Zephyr. The journalists immediately began to whisper, creating noise a contender for victory had arrived. The children were distracted from their conversation by Damon Martini, who neither Lilith nor Cheshure were particularly happy about. Damon Martini arrived. He wasn't as good as Cheshure, of course. He was just so-so. You should have seen the pomp on his face when he saw Lilith next to Zephyr. But that's okay. What infuriated him most was that he wasn't the center of attention, but some handsome guy unknown to him, although he knew him very well. Count Martini's 3rd son immediately went to greet the Duke, who wished him a successful performance. He commented on Lilith's participation and Zephyr's presence, but didn't show that he knew, thinking that no one knew. Lilith said that this horse's name was Zephyr. What else could she say? The journalists recognized Zephyr, the horse that brought victory to the county of Martini last year, but now she miraculously ended up with the Duke, Lilith, and mentioned the wound. To finish Martini off, she also said that the previous owner had given the horse to the stable immediately after the injury. I didn't forget to mention that such horses are sent to slaughter, and the previous owner treated his friend so cruelly. The journalists recorded every word, which would obviously backfire on Count Martini's 3rd son. Lilith looked at the competition map to find something interesting. She suggested that Zephyr go along Route C. There was a lake there, and if necessary, she could drink some water and rest. Lilith had no intention of remembering the map and route at all. She had already made Damon look like a rude and idiot, and Cheshure was supposed to win. It was done. The announcement was made that the competition was about to begin, and within moments the participants were at the start. Damon was already angry, and Lilith was content with the fact that she was able to get him out. Cheshure was absolutely calm. As soon as the shot rang out, everyone immediately rushed forward. The stands watched with interest, although everyone thought that the winner was known in advance. And Zephyr also rushed forward, entering the race. Despite the injury, despite the fact that Lilith was not able to hold on at all, the spell saved her from falling, otherwise she would no longer be in the best condition. The girl instantly grabbed the reins, trying to come to her senses. It was time to come to her senses. The slight shock passed. All that was left was to concentrate. It was strange that Zephyr had rushed so fast, although her goal was different. They were just going to take a walk with Zephyr, not fly at such a speed. In general, she felt a little sick from this pace upon hearing this. The horse immediately began to slow down. It seems that this was a mutual understanding. Apparently Zephyr wanted speed, and Lilith promised to train more. They continued on their way, but Cheshure began to catch up with them. It was unclear how she had ended up ahead of him. The guy started to overtake her, and she was happy. Well, she wanted him to win, like everyone else. We'll find out later how well she guessed, but it's worth noting that Cheshure looked great riding a horse. Lilith wished them luck, admiring Valter and his rider. Ahead of them was a section of the course with obstacles, Route B, I think, and she hadn't trained. Lilith didn't train, but Zephyr did, and it seemed she could complete the course without the rider's instructions. Zephyr knew these routes by heart, yes. This creature was definitely worthy of admiration, and this Damon was even more worthy of condemnation. It seemed like the training had been terrible, since the body now remembered everything by heart. Lilith looked around as the Zephyr sped forward, the lake she had spoken of shining, but she was distracted by a voice. Guess who, of course, the third son of Count Martini, to whom Lilith immediately began to shout some nasty things, deserved it. And the demon tried to deal with the horse. The poor creature, it seemed, also could not stand its terrible master. But his face, when all the wishes and opinions about him reached him, was a masterpiece. Yes, the words about him being untalented hurt him badly. He even blushed. He began to catch up with Lilith, trying to grab her to scold her for what she said, but he couldn't catch up. She continued to do nasty things to him, and he just shouted at her to shut up. Yes, he was reduced to smithereens. He began to demand better results from the horse, but the animal was exhausted. It was already at its limit. The horse, named Betty, seemed to be running low but was able to catch up with Zephyr. He grabbed, trying to remove the magic against the fall. It seemed that something funny was about to happen. The magic against falling was removed. It was time for Lilith to prepare to experience the pain of falling. Zephyr began to brake sharply, and Lilith flew forward. Screams began to spread throughout the area. Over 5 minutes, flight abnormal. She fell, rolling forward on the ground. It was painful. Fortunately, at least she remained alive, although she was a little battered. And Damon galloped ahead. The idiot didn't even bother to help the child he himself had knocked down, so a war between the clans could have started. It remained to be hoped that Cheshure would wipe the nose of this upstart. Lilith wanted to go on foot, but she saw that Zephyr was standing still. It seemed she wanted to finish the race. The two of them went out onto Route C. She didn't know how to remove the spell herself. Everything was as simple as 2 and 2. She planned to expose him. It seemed like Zephyr wanted to continue running, but Lilith was unlikely to be able to without a fall spell. But it seemed like she should have trusted her friend, and it seemed like she didn't want to do it anymore. But no, she wanted to continue. She wanted victories. She wanted speed. Well, whatever will be, will be. Lilith decided to trust, only asked to run carefully. If possible, it was unlikely that she would have survived the second fall so easily. As soon as she gripped the reins tightly, Zephyr rushed forward. It seemed like real horse riding. She was starting to enjoy it. She was already starting to think about continuing to practice after the race. In a way, she was even grateful to Damon with magic. She would never have learned anything. She caught up with Damon very quickly, who was again having problems with Betty, who refused to continue the run. It seems he learned nothing from his situation with Zephyr. The poor horse was able to get some peace for a few seconds, while the rider was perplexed, looking at Lilith and Zephyr. The horse slowed down. Lilith understood why, so that she could make another sarcastic remark. Well, it would have been a sin not to take advantage of the moment the riding genius lost his nerve. Damon was left behind again. Lilith and Zephyr went ahead. Oda, now there was a real rout. Now he was definitely blown to smithereens. It seemed like she was simply in love with this horse, her horse, who seemed to have become her friend. There was one last straight section left, where for some reason the finish line was waiting for her, untouched. Cheshure stood nearby and waited. For some reason it seemed he was waiting for her. A second later, she crosses the finish line first, tearing off the ribbon. Lilith Rubinstein becomes this year's winner in horse riding. She won, but she didn't want to win, she wanted him to win. And he looked at her with tenderness, rejoicing at her victory, although they both understood everything perfectly well. Servants began to approach Lilith to remove the spell and help the princess get down, but there was no spell. The man was horrified when he realized what they could do to him. Lilith asked her to go down so she could go to her dad quickly. The girl was clearly not in the best shape and was also completely injured, but the spell had been tested before the start and it couldn't fail to work. The Duke understood everything and immediately ran to his daughter to check everything. Lilith was badly wounded. The spell was lifted. Now all that was left was to turn on her acting skills and deliver the final blow. You should have seen the look Enoch gave the two servants who cast the magic. She immediately rushed to reassure her father. The spell had been cast correctly, it had simply been removed. And here comes Damon, for the most interesting part. With tears in her eyes, she began to tell who exactly had removed the spell from her, just so that the culprit of what happened could also hear. You could have safely sent it to wish the guy good luck. He will clearly need it. It will clearly not help him. By the way, not only Enoch and Damon heard it, but also the people from the stands. Well, now she was calm. She also wiped the nose of the upstart. It seemed that now he was beginning to worry, but it was too late. She still couldn't stay in the saddle well without magic, and so she fell. Grandfather entered the game and immediately went to sort things out. It was good to have such a family. She, however, decided to stop him right there for some reason, but she really wanted a spectacle. She said that she understood him, because everyone had such high hopes for him because of last year, owed, plus to her karma. It seems that all the journalists have melted, even her grandfather. In everyone's eyes, she was an angel. Another plus in the Rubinstein family's piggy bank. She was a good girl. Oda, it was necessary to extract as much benefit as possible, if not bread and circuses, then at least some benefit, since she was an angel in everyone's eyes. She went to him and extended her hand, talking about a good competition, and with what words she christened him. Refusing now would completely destroy his reputation. People were already whispering behind his back. I had to shake her hand, and she asked me to compete fairly next time, as expected, and she even smiled with all 32 baby teeth. Yes, she was a real genius. To top it all off, she also hugged him. Yes, she really swung with Martini's revenge, all for Zephyr and for Cheshure. Yes, news about Lilith, Cheshure, and Damon came out soon, and the first two were even wanted to be captured in a painting. The artist looked at everything carefully and began to draw. They looked perfect. Even the emperor wanted to have a portrait painted of them. It had to be memorable, so she asked him to hold hands. Yes, someone is blushing again, but he certainly couldn't refuse this little angel who had once saved him from hell, and today seemed especially warm. She didn't know it because Cheshure was holding her hand, but she stood there red-cheeked and pleased. He was distracted from contemplating the porter by Leon and Theo, who came to congratulate him, and Leon even complained that no one had painted him a portrait for winning the hunt. But Theo was quick to remind him that she hadn't just won, until Cheshure interrupted them with a question about what they had in their hands. It was Princess Lara's dress and tiara, with shoes for Lilith. Her birthday was in 3 days. Of course, a pink dress with, of course, pink shoes. And the tiara is beautiful, precious. Yes, the gifts were expensive. They were encrusted with a bunch of diamonds and rubies. They had crazy money in their hands. They decided to go hide the gifts so that she wouldn't find them ahead of time, leaving Cheshure behind. Now he thought about a gift. It seemed that he should also make a gift for the girl. He wanted to make her a gift. There was one small problem. He didn't have enough money to give what he considered a worthy gift, especially compared to her family. At Lilith's suggestion, he was given 1 silver coin a week, about 40,000 heir, the local currency. It was enough for a doll, of which she had plenty. I wanted to give her something that she would want, something that she would like. He remembered that the only thing missing from Lara's set was a wand. Princess Lara was popular throughout the empire, and therefore the prices were astronomical. All that was left was to go to the market and look for something similar. He went around a bunch of shops, but didn't find anything useful, only a wallet in the shape of a hair. The cheapest wand cost 7 silver pieces, although even the stones on it were fake. Everything was too expensive. He started looking for places to make money, but instead he found something else. He saw the lottery and went there immediately. He had 3 silvers left, about 60 tries. He had to get lucky. Axion was walking through the city streets again, checking to see if everything was okay. He felt uneasy, even though they had caught the child trafficker. While looking around, he noticed something interesting, or rather, someone. At the counter stood the boy with whom Enoch had once come here to the festival. It was strange that he was here, and even alone. They said that the child had a not very happy history, so Enoch became his guardian. He had to cope with his daughter first, and then he took a second one, but Enoch's oddities weren't the first. It seemed that this boy was similar to him. The last attempt was unsuccessful. It was the end. It was time to go back. But on the way he met Axion, he also recognized the man. The boy said hello and was about to leave, but he immediately began to scold him for walking the streets alone. Cheshure immediately stated that he was fine and was about to leave, but they didn't let him. He stopped the guy immediately. No, well, it was strange that he was walking around here like that. Enoch wouldn't have allowed that. Suddenly he was doing something strange here. It seems like he needed this thing. Maybe he should have gotten it. He assumed that the Duke himself did not buy him toys, but that was not the point at all. He understood that he was embarrassed to ask. He thought that Enoch was stupid, but he did not quite understand everything correctly. He pulled the boy to the bench and asked if he needed a sword, deciding to do something nice for the child. But he just remained silent. He felt awkward. It seems he didn't guess that it was not the sword of St. Louis that he needed, and that he spent all the money. He needed Princess Lara's wand. Yes, it was strange, and he was also misunderstood. It was awkward. The seller said that the boy spent a lot of money. Apparently he really wanted this stick. The man even felt embarrassed that the boy was getting pacifiers, but the boy himself already wanted to go. But Axion again commanded to stand. He gave him a gold coin and told him to open eggs until he got this unfortunate stick. Uncle Axion was also handsome, especially his anthracite eyes. Enoch sat and sighed as he read the letter inviting Lilith to join the magic tower. The man said that Cheshure should have gone too, since he had signed him up when he formalized guardianship. He immediately suggested postponing the call-up until 9, since the mandatory call-up was from 9, but she started getting hysterical and demanding that she be sent away now. She understood that she needed to open up the abilities to spend life energy, otherwise she simply would not have grown up, all for the sake of her dad. Enoch could only agree and wait for his princess. But she realized that the draft was not the main problem. She had been waiting for a response to the letter for several days, but Dad never responded. But how could he ignore it? She was making such speeches to incite him to revolution. Was it really her fault? All that was left was to believe in Dad, in his justice, goodness, and revolutionary forces. Oh, and Dad is also handsome. He's just getting ready to go somewhere. The man needed to go somewhere in a few days, so he told his daughter. He said that he was going for a gift, but she wasn't stupid. She started asking questions, and he was heading to the central region. Guess why? Oda, so her father did not ignore her letter after all and was going to find Joseph Ruttman. Father said that if he didn't finish it in a day, he would definitely return by her birthday. He planned to spend 3 days on everything. Too much. The Emperor might suspect something. Joseph Ruttman in the original story was Enoch Rubinstein's advisor. By the beginning of the story, he was already on her dad's side. Nobody said directly where and how Ruttman was found, but the original mentioned 3 months of persuasion, so believe him about 3 days. She knew Ruttman's story, and therefore could be useful. She needed to go with him. All that was left was to persuade Dad. But he, of course, began to refuse. It's clear to everyone why. He also said something about a friend whom he wanted to visit, yeah? Oda. Now she definitely won't leave her dad behind. It was time to resort to childish privileges again. She began to scream and cry, saying that she could not live without her dad. No amount of persuasion or argument could compare to the disgusting childish scream, so the Duke didn't even argue. In the end, they came together. Well, how else could it be? It seems that it was not worth taking Lilith here. The back alley of the central district of Walterak did not look very welcoming, to be honest. It was time to admit that Enoch had simply gone crazy. He didn't even know what he had gotten himself into, but he had dragged Lilith here. The first thing he needed to do was protect Lilith, so he cast magic on his daughter so that she would not inhale tobacco smoke. He would have harmed her, so it was worth protecting her. The Duke was very perceptive, so why did it take him 3 whole months to persuade him? It seems that Baron Ruttman was quite unapproachable. Enoch decided to ask directly about the Baron, but this was clearly not the best decision. Yes, even men were confused by such straightforwardness. What to do, how to react to something like this, the people above gave them instructions. In short, they were kicked out of there, which is probably why it took 3 months. Enoch was kind, fair. Such a place was not for him. It seemed that it was difficult for him even to see Ruttman. Enoch decided to reveal his essence and tell it like it is, but the option was clearly not a winning one. Lilith understood this. It was also worth remembering the reason why the Duke changed his identity. It was necessary to act like this. It is unlikely that he would have spoken to him if he had recognized the Duke. It seemed that it was worth looking for another way. Now it was possible to enter the game of Lilith. Now guess what game they are talking about if they are in a casino? Of course, poker, ode. It's going to be hot now, I'd like to say. But no. The man simply came to the casino with his child to play. Nothing special. He asked directly which of them was Baron Ruttman, again, whether it was even possible to do this or not. The blond man carefully examined him from head to toe to understand who was in front of him now. He was Joseph Ruttman. James asked for a little time to talk, but he immediately said that he would not go anywhere, again someone from the nobility. However, the man insisted on his own, so the Baron suggested that he wait until he lost all his money. Oda, he didn't want to talk to anyone about anything. So James took out a bag filled with gold and silver coins, offering to play with it. The game was already underway. The Baron decided to add another 50,000. He looked closely at the child, who seemed to have been taken specifically because of the rumors about him, but he couldn't be touched by that. The man only passed on his bet. From the very beginning, Ruttman's opponent did not make bets, passed, or bet pennies. They could sit here until the morning. Lilith began to shout something, denouncing the man's cards, but he immediately told her to be quiet. Ruttman saw that he had a pair, at most a 3. James had lost, he was sure. The pair was the 9th strongest combination. While the Baron's cards did not have any combinations at first glance, he decided to bet everything. Ruttman hit a card that gave him a flush, the 5th strongest combination, but he didn't know something. James also went all in. Now it was possible to look at the maps. He was already anticipating victory, but there were 4 cards of the same value on the table. A quad is the 3rd strongest combination, and he lost. It's funny, now he seemed to understand why James had brought his daughter here. Lilith sat and waited for her dad with a stick in her hand, or rather a branch she was drawing in the sand. She was distracted by Ruttman, who came out and wanted to get some fresh air. Lilith thought they had already talked, but there was no end in sight to the conversation, so the Baron ran off to get some fresh air. He, seeing the girl's drawing, decided to ask who she was drawing. It was Lilith. The Duke and the Baron. The father considered the Baron his friend. It seems they knew each other. Joseph quite reasonably suggested that it looked like this was the case even in poker. But no, the man played poker for the first time today, and she taught him everything. Yes, it was strange to hear that. She saw that Ruttman had a flush at most, so she realized that they could definitely win. The man had a square from the start. All he had to do was wait for the right moment to throw the bait. And Ruttman took her word for it. Yes, she was clearly a genius. The man stroked the girl's head, smiling. I felt sorry for her. She was so smart, but she was born into the wrong family. What good is a commoner's mind? And her father was clearly a bit of a nutcase. Lilith was interested to hear how things were going and what stage their negotiations were at. James was talking complete nonsense. It seemed like it came from one of the nobles who wanted to use him, but no. The young father came on his own behalf in an attempt to challenge the rotten society of the nobility, and therefore asked for the Baron's help. He clearly did not expect to be offered participation in the revolution. He didn't know who the owners of these two were, but the idea was extremely unrealistic, even crazy. She said they shouldn't have gotten involved, but Lilith had a different opinion about her dad. She knew that Dad could handle it. She believed in Dad. The Baron froze, staring at the child, remembering his daughter. Lilith believed in her dad the same way that the Baron's daughter, Ella Ruttman, once believed in her boyfriend. Well, this is definitely not the reaction she expected. Tears began to flow from Ruttman's eyes, one tear after another. It seemed that something was beginning. Greasy strands of hair began to fall onto his face as soon as he bowed his head, and the memories hurt him deeply. Ruttman couldn't even finish speaking properly. He was overcome with hysteria. He lost his family, he lost his wife and daughter through his own fault. For his help to the people above, he lost everything. The world of power was cruel, rotten, and knew no pity. The loss was hard for him. Now he did not understand why he lived now, why he lived like that then. Every day he was tormented by a feeling of guilt and by the desire to see his daughter's face, to hear her voice, even for a moment. Lilith could hardly hold back her tears. He wanted his family to have everything they needed, but he, being a great politician, realized too late that money was not the most important thing. He was worried that his daughter would never forgive him, but Lilith said that his family would pray for his happiness, that his dad would not be sick and would be happy, so that dad would live a long and healthy life, and then his daughter would be the first to meet him in heaven. It seemed that even the tears stopped flowing, and the man began to gradually come to his senses. She hugged her uncle tightly, said that she loved her dad very much and was sure that his daughter loved him very much too. She advised him to stop gambling and be healthy and happy. All that was left was to hug the little angel tighter and thank heaven for a sign from above, it seemed. Lilith and her father spent 3 days with the Duke, and 2 days after that conversation they were going to leave through the teleportation gate in the Temple of Valtarak. Before leaving, Enoch asked him twice if he had changed his mind, but the answer was the same, so Lilith decided to give the Baron her hair so that he would give it to his daughter when he saw it. Even after seeing this little angel, Joseph still remained of the same opinion. Judging by the presence of the teleportation gate, the family was wealthy. He wasn't a fool, but he still couldn't live modestly. He understood that the rebellion had to begin with the capture of the provinces, because there were many dissatisfied people there. Unlike the center, in the provinces there were more people who hated the imperial power, and to persuade them it was enough to have money and a little time. It was more difficult with people from the capital. It was necessary to find key mid-level players and leave the top ones, and he should stop thinking about it. Professional habits. Why was it necessary to draw such crazy schemes in the head? Of all the nobility, only Rubinstein came to mind. But the old man was not crazy enough to do something like that in his old age, and the son of this family was a deserter. The chance of the rebellion succeeding was zero. He was not going to get involved in it. It seems that he definitely didn't decide to change his mind or somehow change his opinion. He didn't even think about it. The Baron said that if he suddenly went crazy and changed his mind, he would definitely let me know, but he was interested in who they were working for. Who was the owner of the house, which contained so much pathos and recklessness? The answer appeared in a matter of seconds right before his eyes. The man immediately transformed, and before him appeared a father whose daughter was an exact copy of him. Enoch promised to wait until Ruttman changed his mind, saying that the Baron would be able to find him in the Rubinstein ducal house. The Baron didn't have time to say a word before the father and child disappeared into the portal. He didn't even immediately understand what had happened, and the Duke and his daughter, already satisfied, ran to their house. She didn't understand why her father was so calm if he went to pick up a friend but returned empty-handed, and the father asked a counter-question about what his daughter was afraid of. She was worried that the Baron's refusal might mean some kind of trouble. She actually knew why the Baron had to go to them. She sent him to him like that. Lilith said that her uncle himself told her that her dad needed help at work. He looked closely into her eyes, and then he smiled broadly, saying that she was right. Rebellion was also a kind of business, but Lilith didn't need to think about it. She did everything she could. In general, Enoch decided that if Ruttman refused, he would think it over and do it himself. She decided to listen to her dad's opinion. After all, she had done everything she could. Now she needed to take care of herself. True, while they were walking, the Duke remembered his daughter's birthday and that he needed to give her a present. But Lilith didn't need any gift. She had other goals and plans, and this wasn't the last time it was her birthday. But this was her first birthday in the capital, and Dad couldn't miss it. The sun was shining again on the estate. Guess who? The Rubinsteins. Rubinstein Sr. and his daughter were walking around their own estate, talking about the upcoming holiday. They talked about the gifts they wanted to give little Lilith. The man was getting on in years, but he put his granddaughter's wishes and happiness above public opinion. But his daughter believed that the birthday of the heiress of the House of Rubinstein could not pass so quietly. If they had announced a small party at the townhouse for just the family, everyone would have laughed, so at least the gift had to be on a grand scale. She didn't just say this. First of all, it would have hurt the girl's reputation, and it was difficult for a man to argue with this. But the child's desire was the law. The woman understood that the child had not yet fully understood that he was a representative of high society, a society where having 50 dresses was only a basic minimum. However, this was not the most important thing. Walking along the paths, they saw the girl's father. A man with a hammer in his hand was hammering nails for Lilith's gift. The reaction was, of course, beyond all praise. It seems the Duke has gone completely mad. The butler immediately ran up to them and began to scold the grandfather for what was happening. But the butler could do nothing with the gentleman who wanted to make a gift for his daughter himself for her birthday. Of course, he should have entrusted this to the carpenters, but no one argued with the gentleman and, well, they let us have a look for a while. The man seemed to have had a stroke, just like when his son had driven him crazy again in his youth. At the same time, Cheshure was running away from Lilith, hiding his gift. A girl in a dress from Leon and a tiara from Theo tried to stop a guy who was hiding a gift from her. Well, he was embarrassed. He had no business being there. But Lilith didn't think so. She wanted Cheshure to be with her. Although the boy himself sincerely believed that the elder gentleman did not approve of him, and therefore he could ruin everyone's holiday with his presence. True, he didn't take one thing into account: Lilith Rubinstein gets everything if she wants it. She somehow miraculously climbed onto the wall and was about to jump after him. It seemed like he had no choice but to go back to her and eat cake together, otherwise she would have simply fallen. But before he could take a step, the girl staggered and began to fall. Into Cheshure's hands, onto him, and straight to his lips. There was no romance at all in the original, perhaps because the author had old-fashioned taste. Or maybe the author didn't include it here because the romantic line would have been awkward and would have looked ridiculous in this novel. She immediately got off Cheshure, asking how he was and if he got hurt when she fell on him. Here is the first kiss. But the girl, out of embarrassment, began to scold Cheshure because if he hadn't run away, everything would have been fine. And then she saw flowers in his hands, which were apparently intended for her. She was right. The boy immediately handed her a beautiful bouquet that he had bought himself. Everyone can see, yes, how their palms touched. The beautiful purple flowers were mesmerizing. It was hard to take your eyes off them. It was Aristata. It was not a simple flower, but a very symbolic one for this novel. It was this flower that stood in Enoch's office every year on one of the May days. The original Cheshire Cat, upon seeing him in year 4, asked about the meaning of these flowers. They stood in memory of his daughter. It was not just any day, but her birthday. Aristata is a flower that symbolizes birth, a flower that gave hope for the return of Lilith. The exact day was not indicated in the novel. It turns out it was May 19th. This gift touched Lilith greatly. The girl's confession touched him, even embarrassed him a little. She grabbed his hand before he ran away and demanded that he go to the party with him and sing him a song. Well, how could he refuse her? Of course he couldn't. The birthday was celebrated with family, just as Lilith wanted, and everyone sang that very song to her. She made a wish and blew out the candles on the cake, closing her eyes. Everyone congratulated the little girl, wished her all the best. It seemed like it was a wonderful holiday. Lilith wiped her nose and began to thank everyone for such gifts, and for the fact that they had arranged such a surprise for her. Now came the most important thing, something that should have given Lilith, as an aristocrat, some weight in society. One last name was not enough after all. Aunt Antris, that's her last name, was the first to speak. She took out a large box and placed it on the table. As soon as she opened the lid, a bright light poured out from there. A large stone of 100 carats was in the very center. But Lilith would hardly be able to wear something like that. The girl's father knew for sure. My aunt said that she wanted to make it smaller for her age, but then the design came out wrong, so they did it this way. Aunt told Lilith to keep the box and wear it in honor of her debut in society. Lilith thanked her. It was nice. But in her past life, she would have taken out a pretty big loan to get such a thing. Her grandfather's gift was next in line. The piece of paper in her hands was not simple. It was a document for land, for a plot of land along the Parman River. This plot of land was located in the east, was about 100 acres in size, and was insanely expensive. He gave her this plot of land because it was suitable for horse riding. They wouldn't be able to roam around in the capital, so he bought it so that Lilith and Cheshure could go there. Cheshure immediately blushed, lowering his head. It was awkward, but Lilith was glad deep down that her grandfather said this. an area of more than 10 hectares where Zephyr, Cheshure, and Walter could run as much as they wanted. It seemed like someone was turning into a spoiled girl, but she immediately began to thank her grandfather and promise that she would return to horse riding lessons. Now it was Cheshure's turn, who still hadn't given him his gift. Leon was curious what he had given him. She showed the beautiful bouquet of aristocratic that the boy had given her earlier in the day, but Leon was not impressed. And these flowers were very dear to her. Her brother did not understand her at all. Lilith just wanted to answer something to Leon when Cheshure handed her some kind of box. It seems like it was a gift to her from him. The brothers immediately began to tell him to open it quickly. They were interested in what was there. Yes, the gift clearly impressed her. The box contained Princess Lara's wand and that very same rabbit-shaped purse. It seemed that Lilith was now dressed in a full set of Princess Lara. Her dad congratulated her with a smile, but that was not all. In general, the wand was much more expensive than even the shoes. How Cheshure managed to get it was unclear, but what interested her most was the postcard. Her letter touched him very much. She was truly an angel for him, who saved him from hell and showed him heaven. The letter touched her so much that the child even started crying. Even the author doesn't know how to comment here. She apparently almost burst into tears there. After the celebration, it was the Duke's turn to give a gift to his daughter. Along the way, he kept asking what was in that letter, but the girl remained silent, like a partisan. Well, it wasn't possible, it was only for her, and her father kept bringing her closer to the gift. Under the tree, she saw the hanging swing she had dreamed of for so long. Lilith immediately ran to the swing to try it out, and her dad went to help her because she was very little. Yes, Dad clearly guessed right with the gift. She once talked about it when they lived in Xenon. Apparently Dad remembered. Dad started to roll her, listened to the ringing laughter of his daughter. It was a warm spring evening outside. What was most important for the father, of course, was the happiness of his daughter. He was able to make his own happy, which made him very happy. Lilith was probably the happiest child now. Having her dad nearby gave her a sense of security. He promised that he would always make her happy. And Lilith promised that she would make him happy. The girl instantly became serious, thinking about how to make him happy. She made a promise to herself. Although a parent doesn't need much, it's enough for his child to be happy. It was hard to hold back the tears, so she said she wanted to sleep. She never saw what Daddy wrote for her on that swing. My world, my everything. No matter how the wind rages, Daddy will always protect you. There was one day left before enrollment in the training center. The next day was marked by a meeting with the Emperor. It was necessary to prepare. Jetty handed over a small envelope, saying that it was from the owner, from Rico. He was supposed to help her. June immediately began to shed tears, saying that they would miss the young lady and wait for her. They hugged her and cried as if she was already going to war. Well, they just had to accept it and wait. Luckily, the head of the magic tower helped her, saying that they were making a lot of noise, but otherwise the lesson was going well. He kicked them out, although she solved all the problems, but somehow communication between her and Oscar Manuel didn't go very well. He immediately began asking her for answers to problems. The first was a problem about the volume of a rectangular parallelepiped. Next is the length of the hypotenuse of a right triangle. After the area of a circle with a radius equal to 12, how this is even solved, the author has no idea. I hope you didn't call anyone while reading. But he also praised her, said that with such a level of knowledge she could finish it in a month, hinted that he was a great genius and had prepared her so well. But, by the way, he prepared a gift for her, a beautiful bracelet with a heart. The head of the magic tower proudly said that he designed this bracelet himself, but Lilith started whining that he was childish, for which she got hit on the head, but oh well, Oscar Manuel extended his hand to her. And then he put the bracelet on her. It was not a simple bracelet, but a magical artifact. She was curious which one exactly, but they never told her which one exactly. They just started to send her away and told her to wear it carefully. The lesson was over for today, so she ran home quickly, but it was not to be. The man immediately grabbed her by the backpack in the shape of a bear, but last time it was a hare. It was as if he had grabbed the kitten by the scruff of the neck and lifted it up, asking why she was running away like that, as if this was all she had been waiting for. And she was going to go for a walk with a friend, actually. What kind of friend he was, the head didn't know. It was about Cheshure, the dark-haired boy, Oscar realized. He immediately said that the lesson was continuing, so Lilith needed to sit back and continue studying. It was completely unfair. The man couldn't throw words to the wind, but the head of the magic tower said that the tone could. He decided to find out if she liked Cheshure, which was strange. She, of course, said that yes, he was her best and only, to be honest, friend. But he didn't mean friendly feelings. It was strange that he even asked such a thing. Was he in love or something? But she was just a child and already fell in love. Amber eyes looked at the girl attentively. Cheshure was 11, 4 years older than her. She learned about this from the head of the magic tower. He just closed his eyes, telling me to continue solving the problems. Since I had already left them, I needed to study. Today was the day of admission. The whole family gathered to see Lilith and Cheshure off to the training center. Theo told the boys to eat well and promised to write to them, and Leon immediately warned that if someone offended her, she should write to him. Grandfather and aunt wished them good studies and promised to wait for their return. The training center seemed like some kind of camp to her, apparently. The author of the novel liked this kind of theme, but she expected to see something like a kindergarten. The Duke brought the children. Now it was time to say goodbye. It was hard for the man. He covered his face with his hands, trying to hide his tears. It was awkward, strange in general, that Dad cried like that. She promised him that she would study for a month and return, but how could Dad live a whole month without his princess? He told her to eat well, find friends, and was worried about her. He hugged the children tightly, wishing them easy learning and a good time. He also reminded Cheshure not to forget his words. The boy remembered everything. The man left. All they had to do was see Dad off and go inside. Lilith knew what Dad was talking about, she read. He was advanced. The Duke, in the process of training the boy, most likely long ago realized that Cheshure was special. He consisted of 100% magical power. In others, magical and holy powers were mixed in different proportions. Cheshure was the only one who did not obey the Emperor's example. The power of the example was based on holy power, so it could subjugate anyone who had even a little bit of holy power, so Cheshure was impossible to control. That's why in the original he was able to kill her and the Emperor. Apparently his father told him to hide it so that no trouble would happen. They stood at the entrance for people who had a special pass for the 1026th stream. Lilith and Cheshure were already standing in the hall, waiting for the example to arrive. They were informed that he would arrive soon. Lilith looked at her uniform. There was a gold badge hanging on the left side. She looked at Cheshure, who had a white badge on his shirt, different from the one she had. It was not without reason that this happened. Her heart sensed that the color of the badge also meant something. Some sat and chatted, while children with white badges often sat to the side, as if they were afraid of something. Even in the magic tower, there was a division into ranks. The plan was to ask Dad to blow up this center first when they returned. His Majesty the Emperor of Example arrived. Everyone froze. Lilith immediately turned her head to see the boss, the main villain she needed to defeat. He immediately went to the children. It seemed that he was going to Lilith. Trouble. Something was planned. Yes, he came straight to her, kneeling down to the child. Lilith could only greet him by example. It was too early to show character. Finally, he saw the heiress of the ducal house of Rubinstein. He had been waiting for this meeting for a long time. The blonde's eyes flashed unkindly. He said it as if they were close, even though they weren't. The man immediately picked up the child in his arms, carrying him to his chair, from where he was supposed to speak. Emperor Nicholas was originally a villain who kept her imprisoned and used her powers her entire life, and then forced her to kill other people. He was waiting for her, just as she was waiting for this day. All that was left was to destroy the Emperor. Then she could calmly take care of herself. The girl immediately smiled sweetly from ear to ear and said that she was very glad to meet the Emperor. It was as if he had said it so loudly on purpose that she was the only daughter of Sir Enoch, the head of the Holy Order, the heiress of his beloved Rubinstein house. He told her everything about her. The man touched his forehead to Lilith's forehead. May endless love, examples, and glory of the Empire be with her. Everything was ready. Now she had an open core, which the Emperor had awakened through the force of examples. He began to ask how she felt, but she was now in the most wonderful condition. He told the professors to pay special attention to her during her studies, and then turned to the children. He waved his hand to direct the power of the example to the rest of the children. Everyone immediately felt the warmth spread throughout their bodies. It seems like he hugged her like that on purpose. Why was it necessary to put on such a show? All the children looked at her. It seemed she had no chance of making friends here now. In general, people with divine power, even if they had mana, could not use it without permission. The Emperor, for example, opened her core. Now she is not a powerless 7-year-old child. She will make the Emperor regret this day in the future. The woman gave her a short tour of the dorm and led her to her room. Even the signs on the doors were selected by color. It was some kind of strange academy. Lilith entered the room, and the neighboring girls immediately ran up to her to get acquainted. The first to introduce herself was the girl with pink hair, Elisha Mayer. The purple hair belonged to Diane. The blonde hair belonged to Cutie Michelle. The girls were 9, but they said she could talk to them without formalities. Of course, she had a gold badge. She was higher in status than them. They should have spoken to her formally. She counted 3 girls. Although there should have been 5 of them with her, the 5th girl did not come out to say hello. She was told that there was no need to greet her. It seems that it was a jam. Lilith generally had a good opinion of her neighbors for now, but there was no strong desire to be close friends with them. Meyer immediately offered Lilith something to eat, saying that it was time for afternoon tea. You could get a snack in the canteen, you had to go get it. The fair-haired Michelle immediately began shouting at Jem to go get a snack, but she flatly refused. Michelle turned out to be a somewhat unpleasant person, and immediately began to get hysterical when a commoner did not follow their orders. They started shouting at her, and even brought Lilith into it. Although she was generally silent, Jem immediately sat up in bed, startling all 3 of them. The look was angry. It was understandable why. She made it clear to them that she said no. She didn't care about their statuses. She wasn't going to bow down to anyone. That is why they settled commoners with children who had at least some connection to the nobility. They mixed people of different classes to reinforce and hammer into children's heads the meaning of class differences. White badges became something like servants, for example. The academy was hopeless. It had to be burned. It had to be burned. Lilith said that the girl was not a servant. They should have gone and taken food for themselves. No one dared to disobey. Jem simply turned away and continued sleeping, ignoring her roommates. The rest of the group went to the canteen for a snack, since Jem refused to bring them any. Other children with white badges walked past them, carrying food to their rooms for those of higher social status. Suddenly it dawned on Lilith, we understood what she was worried about. If not, then I will tell you. Cheshure also had a white badge, so to speak. At this time, the guy was sitting in his room, watching his neighbors. The first to approach him was some red-haired guy, asking about Lilith after all. They had talked after the ceremony. It was Bruce Chamber. Cheshure decided to tell her that he was nobody to her, but the redhead still did not leave him alone, thinking that he was not a commoner. In general, he was right. Cheshure was the illegitimate child of the Count, but he preferred to remain a commoner for them. He had promised Lilith's father. The second guy, Simon, suggested that it was all in his face. Cheshure was undoubtedly handsome. So Bruce decided that his pretty face had caught the lady's eye, making himself and his friend look ugly. Apparently there was nothing but a face, then one could safely order him. Bruce told the commoner to bring them snacks and water. Cheshure first thought that it was because there were people on duty who brought everything, but no, so he asked the second logical question. Why did he have to bring them something? Then Bruce pointed to his badge, and then to the Cheshure badge, hinting at their rank. Now he understood why he was placed with the nobles. But Cheshure still refused to carry anything for them, sighing he didn't like all this because they were clearly able to walk on their own. Bruce immediately turned to the guy sitting above, asking how he could teach a commoner a lesson. That guy was Gerard Schmidt, reading a book in his bed. But he immediately said that he was reading and told the guys to figure it out themselves. He had no time for that. Another guy came up, also wearing a white badge, stuttering. He offered to bring everything himself, just so they wouldn't quarrel. Bruce motioned for him to come over, waving his hand. The punch landed right on his cheek, so hard that the guy staggered back, almost falling. Cheshure's expression was quite telling, as if he had returned home to his father, where he was being bullied by his half-brother. At this time, Bruce was scolding the boy, saying that he had started to interfere again, although he had been told not to interfere until asked. He continued to shout until Cheshure himself stood up and came to them, saying that he would bring everything. He could not look at it. And Bruce naively decided that he was scared. He just didn't want any problems for the Duke, so he decided not to show himself once again. He said not to confuse it with food for Gerard. He didn't understand, of course, but he went anyway, and that boy followed him. The boy called his neighbor and then caught up with him to help, since he didn't know where the dining room was. The guy advised the dark-haired man not to answer Bruce. He could raise his hand if he was angry. Cheshure noticed that the boy was constantly stuttering. It was not always like this. It is worth noting, he was not like this before. After getting here, it all started. It seems that the beating of the boy led to his speech impairment. It was terrible. At that time, there was a line of white badges in the canteen to collect food. Bruce showed where everyone stood in line and got their food. The guy, while listening to the boy, looked around the dining room and noticed Lilith. She also noticed him and immediately ran to him to talk. She knew he would come. She was waiting for him. He seemed to have come here because of the nasty neighbors. The guy denied everything, but he closed his eyes again and lied. Lilith immediately understood. Instead of Cheshure, his neighbor told the truth. He immediately introduced himself as Lilith. His name was Ram. Ram told him everything as if it were true, and Lilith thanked him, looking at her friend. Lilith immediately began to scold the guy and asked him not to do this, or anything at all that he was ordered to do. But Cheshure didn't listen to her and actually told her to act as if they weren't familiar. Everyone was looking at them. Cheshure understood that this could harm her reputation. Questions would start to arise. He asked her to be patient for just a month. Although it was much more difficult for him than for her, he did not want to attract attention. If he caused a stir, then his uncle would have problems. Lilith was shocked. She was sure that Dad would be proud of Cheshure. He would be pleased to hear such a thing. She immediately pulled the two towards her and asked how many of them were in the room, starting to serve them that very snack. The girl had a gold badge. She could take as many as she wanted, so she put exactly 5 pieces for everyone. The girl asked Roma to take it into the room and say that it was Lilith Rubinstein. She promised that if anyone forced Cheshure to carry any buns again, she would personally come to their room. Then something very bad will happen that they will definitely not like. The poor Roma's hair stood on end. He promised to pass everything on, and she shook his hand in gratitude. The next time Cheshure and Lilith saw each other was at dinner that same day. Children from other rooms with white badges carried trays of food for their neighbors. Lilith genuinely thought this gem was cool because she never gave up. The noblewomen's girls were afraid of her and therefore could not do anything with her. She remained in her proud solitude. But her other neighbors complained that everything was fine in the other rooms, but they had to get their own food. Lilith just sighed. It was sad that Cheshure didn't have even a drop of the same tenacity as Jem. Lilith was generally against these ranks. She was distracted from her conversation with the girls by the top of the Cheshire Cat's head. He was walking again with trays, apparently carrying food to the neighbors again. Lilith immediately left her tray and went to Cheshure and Ram. Cheshure immediately told her to pass by. Perhaps he was afraid that she would do something. The Cheshire Cat repeated to her again that she should not make noise. Now even the children of aristocrats were looking at them. Lilith, of course, did not argue. She simply silently snatched the tray. It was hard for him. She decided to help him. What was wrong? Ram immediately showed her the right table and said that he wanted to tell Bruce everything, but Cheshure himself stopped him. The girl approached the boys' table with a tray and greeted that same Bruce. The guy answered her immediately. Getting up from the table, she was of a higher rank. The children of aristocrats could make excellent connections here. She placed a tray in front of him and said that she had brought it for him, but he did not immediately understand why. She grabbed his wrist, asking if it hurt and if everything was okay, if it was broken. He shook his head. Then she asked the next question. Why didn't the guy take the food himself if everything was fine with him? From that day on, she told him to bring his own food. And then she pointed at Cheshure and Roma, telling them not to force others. He just smiled contentedly. It seemed the girl didn't know about the rules here. The white badge did all of this. There was no such rule, but everyone did it. Then she asked a logical question. If someone had a badge of a different color, then they had to obey. He just nodded. Now everything was clear to her. Then Bruce Chamber from now on had to obey her and bring everything to himself. The guy, of course, fell out of reality. Everything seemed logical, but not as he would have liked. If Chambers was suddenly so lazy as to do everything himself, she would happily break his wrist in her room. Everyone was looking at them. Bruce had just been humiliated. She had gone too far, in his opinion. Everyone did it, but he was the only one getting it. But Lilith couldn't understand his indignation. She had a gold badge. He had to obey her. Didn't he really like it? They were distracted from their bickering by laughter behind Bruce's back. A guy with purple hair was laughing. He burst out laughing, wiping away tears. The scene was painfully funny. Could anyone really give the upstart Bruce a piece of his mind? That boy also had a gold badge like hers. The boy's name was Gerard Schmidt. I think they've already talked about him. Bruce immediately ran to Gerard in the hope that he would be protected, but he only told him to obey. Everything was according to the rules that he was so inflamed about. It seems that Chamber was left alone against his own convictions. And Gerard repeated to him, telling him to listen to her and bring himself a tray. The public flogging seemed to be over. Cheshure was protected from someone's mockery. Gerard Schmidt was the youngest son of the ducal house of Schmidt, a future knight of the order who served under her father. Lilith thought about him quite well. He is also not the last character in the story. He was also a villain after all. Lilith knew from Rico that Schmidt was in the training center, but she didn't think that he would be with Cheshure. Rico collected information for her about all the nobility in the center. Cheshure entered the center 2 years earlier than in the original. If things were different, the boys would not have met at school, being students of different streams. But even though the story changed a little, the connected characters were still forced to clash. For example, remember the arrival of Lilith and her father, who had just arrived in the capital. They met Cheshure immediately upon arrival, as if fate itself had brought them together. Gerard had entered in March of this year, was in the same class as she, but was already 11 because his father had asked for a deferment. The Duke's eldest sons died in the war, so the Emperor made concessions, since after finishing his studies he had to join the army. Gerard was madly in awe of Duke Enoch in the original and envied Cheshure, his father's adopted son, who could do everything. Each time he put a spoke in his wheel, which is why he repeatedly got into danger, and in the end a terrible catastrophe happened. Battles with monsters were always difficult for Cheshure because he consisted of pure magic. The strength of the monsters was equal to his strength. They absorbed more than half of his attacks. He could not even always control the density of time, because somewhere the power of their attacks was especially great. Cheshure decided to stop hunting, because the losses were high, and things were not getting any easier. The terrain was difficult to pass. Gerard spoke out against him, saying that the swordsmen could have left if they were scared. The knight believed that if he did not kill them all now, their work would be in vain. He could take the glory for himself, and let all those who were afraid go. But for Cheshure, laurels were not more important than the lives of his subordinates. If Schmidt saw a chance of success, he did not interfere. Schmidt drew his blade, heading into battle with his men, even as Cheshure tried to stop him. Leon, who approached his brother, decided that the bastard had become completely fearless since he didn't listen. Even Leon understood that he was doing everything in defiance of Cheshure, as if the frog were contradictory. Without the swordsman, the hunt would have failed, so to reduce the number of casualties, Cheshure had to use his men. As a result, Cheshure continued the fight, and later regretted his decision. For a long time. The reckless fight turned into a complete rout. He wasn't sure they would get out alive, but he couldn't even imagine that he would lose his brother in this battle. Unfortunately, it was too late. Leon didn't even have time to finish speaking before his spirit left his body. In that battle, Cheshure lost his second brother, seemingly leaving him alone forever. Yes, it was a terrible moment. Lilith could not allow Leon to be lost. Theo was saved, so it was necessary to save the second one. She was still far from the second volume, but now she had already changed a lot. There was no certainty that everything would go according to the plot. The problem was that for her father, the Schmidt family were allies. Of the 5 ducal houses of the empire, 3 houses supported the rebellion, the Entres brothers, and the uncle of Axion Libre. And the Schmidt family, the head of the house after the loss of 2 of its children, quite logically hated forced conscription. The Schmidts had enormous military power, especially since they were allies of the Rubinstein family. There was nothing she could do about it. They were needed. But Gerard was still a child, 11 years old before he went downhill. She had to raise him right. The guys were talking about rank differences. Bruce was asking about Gerard's rank. I think he was DOS, but he himself wasn't sure, I think. This year there were 2 gold badges at once. Cheshure listened to them involuntarily, without entering into a dialogue. Gerard, seeing Lilith, immediately grimaced, remembering how he was given a verbal kick. The girl carried the tray herself, and it seemed she did not contradict her own words. It was strange to them. If she followed Cheshure because of his face, in their opinion, then no one could understand the rest of her behavior. It seems she was heading here. It seems to be to Cheshure. Bruce immediately screamed out of fear that he hadn't asked Cheshure for anything. He was scared, and it served him right. She froze, looking at Gerard. It was time to start educating him. She also gave him some juice that she took from the buffet. She smiled at him and wished him bon appétit. He didn't answer. His face was calm, but Bruce and his friend were very surprised. He smiled back for the sake of propriety, thanked her, and that was how they parted. Bruce immediately said that she liked him, but he assumed that she wanted to be friends. The guy immediately looked towards Cheshure, smiling strangely. The Cheshure looked back, his face expressionless. He demonstratively shook the bottle as if to say, "Look what's there." The Cheshure just turned away, covering his eyes. What did it matter to him? The girls immediately began to ask about Lilith's actions, thinking that she liked Gerard, but no, she denied everything. She didn't lie. The girls thought she was shy, but they reassured her by saying that they all liked him, but she didn't understand the reason because he was ordinary. The girls said he was popular and handsome, very handsome. He was like a prince to them, but Lilith knew that Cheshure was 100 times more handsome. The girls immediately switched to another topic. It was their relationship with Cheshure. It seemed that they were very close.